Yeah. Okay, good. Hello, everyone. My name is Wolfgang Niedermark. I'm a member of the executive board of the Federation of German Industry, and I'm in charge for international affairs, and I really feel privileged to welcome you all to our today's seminar, the conference on the baseline for international sustainability standards. And dear Mr. State Secretary, Mr. Benjamin Strasser, I think you are already in the room. And later we will also have Mr. State Secretary Florian Tonka, and we are really privileged to have you here in today's event. And more than that, of course, we are proud that we have Mr. Emmanuel Faber, the president of the ISSB, and of course, a lot of panelists representing the G7 countries and B7 countries, and of course, all of you listening to today's seminars here, dear ladies and gentlemen. So it's really great to start this conference on sustainability reporting. And I would really like to express my gratitude to the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Finance for their support today. The main target, as I said, is to discuss how to implement the global baseline in sustainability reporting. And the B7, so our organizations of the business communities of the G7 countries, recently welcomed again the work of the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, and emphasized the need of a common understanding of sustainability standards to scale up financing for decarbonization. Before we start these discussions, I would like to summarize the most important outcomes of the B7 process in the first half of this year. And we have had this final communique in summer with two important signals. First, the importance of the common foundation of values and rules of the G7 states as a basis for our economic growth, prosperity, sustainability, and innovation, as a bastion against the war. The leaders of the B7 here gathered in this group and the business across our membership firmly condemn the Russian aggression against Ukraine and fully support the effective sanctions that the governments of the G7 and other democratic nations adopted, raising costs on Russia and calling upon Russia to retreat from Ukraine and paving the way for a peace settlement. Very important. Secondly, the decisiveness of B7 to support their governments to work closely together to make a new globalization a success for all in the future. And I think 24th of February this year was not the starting point, but it was really a booster to design a new kind of globalization process. And this new globalization will see more competition. It will come with a lot of conflict, but it still needs cooperation. And that's our topic today. Where can we still cooperate? Facing these challenges, B7 welcome the inclusion as a partner in this engagement group process of the G7 to bring the essential perspective of the private sector into these discussions. The collaboration between us, business, and the government working in a partnership is critical to overcome these challenges ahead and to drive inclusive and sustainable growth for all. We believe that globalization is a basis of resilience. Openness of markets for trade and investment is essential for the B7 economies and therefore a basis and condition for growth and prosperity. The B7 calls on their governments to advocate globally to work together towards open markets, ambitious trade agreements, and international economic relations with diverse partners, even with the most complicated partners, and thus allowing for a resilient global economy. The resilience of the G7 economies must grow through diversification of supply chains, building business alliances with trustworthy and like-minded partners, joint projects, and pioneering industrial standards. The new globalization, as we call it, still needs multilateral institutions such as WTO, UN, IMF, World Bank, and so forth. And of course, institutions as the OECD, G20, G7. They are the pillars for a rule-based economy for both the industrial and emerging economies. Without global coordination and without global applicable rules for trade and investment, our economic growth will suffer. And the global baseline in sustainability reporting is one important outcome of these shared values, multilateralism, and international cooperation. And the ISSB would not have been founded without this common ground of the rule-based international system. So we are talking mainly about decarbonization here today. The B7 is pushing the G7 governance to upgrade emerging policies on this green transition. The challenges to substitute fossil energies imports from Russia may not hinder this transition, whilst ensuring business continuity and allowing investment in infrastructure. For a successful ecological transition, the investment in renewable energy, hydrogen, nuclear, carbon capture and storage, and other clean energy technologies will need to be enormous. Not only is the need in these technologies high, but strong coordination will be needed for the energy transition, including the greening of transport, manufacturing, and housing. It goes without saying that we need a global approach to global problems. The fight against climate change is currently taking a backseat, but every year we spend solely on crisis management is a year wasted on our way to drastically reduce global CO2 emissions. It would be a shame if we would be tired at this end, but the situation is difficult. But as I said, we cannot deal with the situation as if there is no crisis, but definitely still stick to our goals that the transatlantic community has set. And we cannot do it alone, or Europe certainly cannot do it on its own. It's a global issue, and we have to be really strict on that. It is therefore wise that the G7 countries want to form a climate club. We as a B7 want to make our contribution to shaping this new form of plurilateral cooperation. This requires impetus for a level playing field in climate policy among G7 countries in order to prevent carbon leakage and promote decarbonization. And business have already increased their efforts to cut emissions, and we are committed to playing our part. But what we need is a common understanding of sustainability standards to further scale up financing for decarbonization. And therefore the work of ISSB on a global baseline, it will be key to ensuring international interoperability and avoiding fragmentation. And all investors, all international investors with global investment portfolios were calling for this high quality, transparent, reliable, and comparable reporting by companies on ESG matters, as initiated in the foundation of the ISSB by the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. German industry strongly support the leadership of IFRS, and it's key for worldwide access for international capital. The IFRS stands for consistent, comparable financial reporting, resulting from a fully transparent standard setting process. So therefore, the German industry is decisive to contribute. We are already part of the initiative to locate ISSB at Frankfurt, no surprise, and to give a strong signal to the European and international capital market. Europe must play a key role here, and the ambitions of Europe are clear. And against this background, I've tried to describe. I wish you a fruitful discussion here today, and thank you for your attention. And wish you fruitful discussion, which will be started now by the State Secretary.
Very much, Wolfgang Niedermark, for your welcoming words. So welcome from my side too. My name is Annette Selter, and I organized this conference here with all of us. And as we learned, the globalization and the cooperation are key for the B7 and the G7, and it's key for us too for our discussion today. And we will start with Mr. Strasser with his keynote from the Ministry of Justice. Benjamin Strasser is the Secretary of State of the Ministry of Justice for this legislative period, and he's a member of the Liberal Party. The Ministry of Justice, as well as the Ministry of Finance, were really actively supporting the settlement of the location of the ISSB here in Frankfurt. And they were, in fact, as well initiating this conference to discuss the global baseline. As the Ministry of Justice advocates principle-based legislation, we are really looking forward to to hear from Mr. Strasser the thoughts of the Ministry of Justice concerning the global baseline. Mr. Strasser, it's to you.
Thank you, Mr. Niedermark, for your welcoming words and your invitation to this conference. Thank you, Mrs. Schelte, dear panel participants, dear guests. With regard to the topic turning the global baseline for sustainability reporting into reality, I would like to take up the following three questions in this keynote. First, why is sustainability reporting important? Second, why is a global reporting baseline important? And third, what is important when turning such a baseline into reality? Let us take a look at the first question. Why is sustainability reporting important? Sustainability is a key solution to many of the challenges of our time. In recent years, the risks and opportunities for companies have changed. Awareness is growing on the topics of climate change, environment, biodiversity, and social issues. Awareness of the financial implications of such risk has also grown, in particular for investors. Sustainable development goals are increasingly being incorporated into national policies, plans, and budgets. Governments want to reorient capital flows towards sustainable investments in order to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. And private sector engagement in sustainable investing is also growing. Financial institutions have embraced sustainable development goals and have taken significant steps to incorporate them into their operations. The disclosure of relevant, comparable, and reliable information on sustainability matters can be an important element in achieving sustainability goals. Allow me to point out some specific aspects here. First, sustainability reporting can help companies to identify and manage their own risks and opportunities related to sustainability matters. It also increases awareness and understanding of these risks and opportunities. Second, investment products are increasingly seeking to meet certain sustainability objectives. Good sustainability reporting can enhance a company's access to capital. It paves the way for diversification of the investor base. Sustainability reporting is also important from a macroeconomic standpoint. It can help to avoid systemic risks. A cascade of investment decisions that are not based on adequate sustainability reporting could threaten the stability of the whole financial system. And third, sustainability reporting can provide a basis for better dialogue and communication between companies and their stakeholders. And it can help companies to improve their reputation. Consistent sustainability reporting can build trust and significantly reduce ad hoc requests for information. Let us move on the second question. Why is a global reporting baseline important? Maybe I should be more precise. Why is a global baseline important now? It is clear that different reporting requirements make it more difficult to compare the reported information. Thus, there are growing expectations on companies to use frameworks and standards. In the last decade, we have seen a huge number of standard-setting initiatives of all kinds, focused on specific subjects or industries. But now, we are talking about mandatory standards. These mandatory standards in various jurisdictions have accelerated the need for international alignment. This puts the discussion about a global baseline on the agenda. Additionally, a lack of generally accepted methods for measuring, valuing, and managing sustainability risks will increase costs and burdens for reporting companies and for users of such information. These are the problems we face: a lack of comparability on an international level and unnecessary administrative burdens. And these problems can only be addressed by a global solution. Reporting on the basis of internationally accepted standards is the only way to reduce ad hoc requests for information. Any kind of double reporting should be avoided. I would like to point out that the EU legislature, inspired by a proposal from the German federal government, has recognized these two problems. Consequently, a solution has been found in the form of the recently finalized Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Not only the CSRD include a specific reference to work of the ISSB, it also addresses the need to incorporate global baseline standards into European standard setting work. The second panel will further discuss how companies will benefit from the use of a global baseline, so I do not want to delve deeper into that issue here. And now for the third and final question. What is important when turning a global baseline into reality? From my point of view, this question is the most difficult one in my keynote. I know that the experts in the following panel discussions have far more expertise on this issue than me. However, please allow me to present some humble ideas on the question of what is important when turning a reporting baseline into reality. I would like to focus on the following three aspects. First, interoperability. Second, proportionality. And third, enhancing the base. Let me start the issue of interoperability. Global baseline should ensure interoperability with national and regional requirements. On the one hand, this would minimize the fragmentation of reporting requirements and guarantee compatibility globally. Additionally, reporting burdens will be reduced. On the other hand, interoperability would also allow for flexibility with regard to special national and regional objectives. European legislation has paved the way for consistent and interoperable standards. When adopting EU sustainability reporting standards, the EU Commission will give to take into account, I quote, "to the greatest extent possible, the work of global standard setting initiatives for sustainability reporting." Additionally, the Commission will regularly review the standards and take into account relevant developments, including developments with regard to international standards. Let me move on to the issue of proportionality. Here, I want to point out the following: that turning into reality also means being realistic. Thus, it is clear that those working on a baseline have to take into account the need to avoid disproportionate burdens, in particular on small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as on emerging and developing economies. Let me come to the issue of enhancing the base. In order to develop a comprehensive global baseline, the ISSB should over time extend coverage beyond its initial focus on climate-related information. It should include other sustainability-related topics such as nature, biodiversity, and social issues. Otherwise, satellite standards might emerge that challenge the comprehensive approach of the ISSB standards. Apart from these rather technical issues, there is one more issue I want to highlight, and that is the need for cooperation and dialogue. A true global baseline requires an open dialogue with the aim of achieving standards that can be implemented globally. Standard setters should proactively engage in understanding the view of others, as well as in identifying different understandings. These are not only empty phrases. In fact, dialogue is essential for the success of sustainability reporting itself. Moreover, turning the baseline into reality also means reflecting reality in the baseline. Thus, we need to find pragmatic solutions that take into account the abilities and the limits of what companies can report. There are different views on which sustainability information is relevant and which is not. All these views must be considered when identifying different and common understandings or positions. The next step, all persons involved will have to closely cooperate to find solutions acceptable for all sides. Such an integrative dialogue is essential. Otherwise, the acceptance of sustainability reporting would be endangered. That brings me to the end of my keynote for the panel discussion. But I don't want to close without stressing that I am very glad that the ISSB will have a presence in Germany, in Frankfurt. The Frankfurt office provides the set of the board and the office of the ISSB chair and one of the vice chairs. I think the inaugural ISSB meeting in July 2022 was an important milestone for both the ISSB and the sustainable finance community in Germany. I would like to thank all of those that were part of this huge success. I'm looking forward to a great discussion with contributions from all over the world. I am sure that this panel discussion can become an important part of the necessary international dialogue, which I have stressed in this speech. Thank you for listening.
Okay. So thank you very much, Benjamin Strasser and the Ministry of Justice for this keynote and these insights towards the global baseline and sustainability reporting, which leads us right away to our discussion and to our first discussion of our conference here, how to turn the global baseline into reality. So before starting, I want to present our panelists here, and I will start with Emmanuel Faber. We are really happy that you're with us today. Emmanuel Faber is chair of the International Sustainability Standards Board, recently since its recent foundation. And we just heard from the Ministry of Justice that we are really happy that the ISSB is located in Frankfurt. And as we heard, there was the first meeting already at place in Frankfurt. So Emmanuel Faber is an expert in sustainability reporting, and with his determination and conviction to sustainability reporting, he plays a decisive role to turn the global baseline into reality. So it's very nice that we have you with us. Given the importance of the European market and the legislative action going on there, I'm pleased that we have Kerstin Lopata with us, who is professor in Hamburg at University for financial accounting, auditing and sustainability. And she's interim chair of the EFRAG Sustainability Standards Board, and I think in this function she's in the spotlight to achieve global European standards. So really happy that she's with us today. And from the United States, as the United States are really a key player for international capital markets, I'm happy that we have Christina Voits with us. And she was senior counsel at the SEC for climate and SDG before moving to the consultancy side to Persephone. And she will help us today to explain or to understand the global approach of the SEC proposal for sustainability reporting. From Japan, and here I have to introduce or welcome Yasunobu Kawanishi here, well, I will call him Nobu in the course of the discussion. He's here in person and coming from Japan right away, yesterday I think he told me. And he's chair of the Accounting Standards Board in Japan, and as well from the Sustainability Reporting Board. So he's integrates both sides, the financial and the non-financial, like we used to call it, the sustainability side. And he's really involved in the current discussions right now on the global baseline. And last not least, I have here my, I say colleague, the German president, or the president of the German standard setter, who is here with us today to discuss. And he's in charge to incorporate the sustainability reporting side in the national standard setter, and he's really supporting the global baseline and deeply involved in the discussion as well in the European discussions. So as I said, that we will discuss with our first panels how to realize, how to, turning the global baseline into reality. And I think the answer has to be given by the standards and regulators. So this is the content of the first discussion. And first we want to have a view on the investors' need and for sustainability-related information and the involvement of the investors and the capital markets in the foundation of the ISSB. And so I will ask first Emmanuel Faber to talk to us a bit about the reasons or the thoughts of the investors founding the International Sustainability Standards Board. And probably you can as well give us an insight about the influence or the role of the private initiatives for investor-focused sustainability disclosure standards in the development of the draft of the ISSB standards. So Emmanuel Faber, happy to hear you.
Thank you, Annette. I hope you can hear me well. It's a pleasure and an honor to participate with you all in this high-level conference, which I think is very useful, as you commented, given the momentum in the standard setting in sustainability right now. And I'm happy to join colleagues and friends that I've known to or discovered over the last several months of my current mission. So great to participate here. Two things I would say really is that investors' interest has been absolutely fundamental to the creation of ISSB. The consultation of the IFRS Foundation launched in 2020 was already mentioning some both individual and collective initiatives by investors to structure their approach about sustainability, in particular in climate. And there was mention of the Climate 100+ group that gathers a lot of large insurance banks and others and investments. And the IOSCO has been absolutely core to the creation of ISSB, following the Sustainable Finance Task Force of IOSCO in 2020, which mentioned that the need of investors in terms of disclosures about sustainability were not met. The important and an urgent need for a globally consistent set of disclosures, suggesting that IFRS Foundation would have a role to play. That was the call of IOSCO in early 2021. So this is really to say, I think investors' interest in protection was core and central in establishing the current dialogue that we have and our mission. To answer your second question, the remit and the mission that the Technical Readiness Working Group received was really to start from the best existing standards, and most of them were private, And so illustrative of that was that the members of the TRWG that was established in April 21 included, of course, IASB, but also the TCFD framework under the leadership of the Financial Stability Board, the CDSB, which is the standard setter organization from the CDP, the Value Reporting Foundation that includes both the SASB standards and the integrated reporting framework. And finally, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, that had established their stakeholders' capital initiative with metrics. IOSCO was an observer in addition to that. At the end of that process, as you know, and as was announced at the COP26, CDSB, SASB, and the IR framework were consolidated, were going to be consolidated in the ISSB. So now it is that consolidation has taken place. And TCFD had long said that they would not engage in standard setting and that they would view ISSB as their legacy in terms of their framework, which led to the adoption of TCFD for us, not only on climate, but overall in S1, which is the foundational IFRS S1 sustainability disclosure proposal that we have. So maybe I will stop here, but this is to say that one, investors will at the core and remain at the focus, the core focus of what we do. That's the reason we exist. And second, we have gathered as many as possible of private initiatives because the mission was to consolidate, avoid the fragmentation, and stop the non-comparability and the alphabet soup of ESG, as was called. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Emmanuel, so for I hope it's a lot of abbreviations, but TCFD we all know, and it was interesting to hear that again, the big support which leads to the foundation of the ISSB. So we turn to the European side, and I will ask Kerstin Lapotta now, because European is a really important player to turn the global baseline into reality. So I'm interested to understand the decision process in Europe towards European sustainability standards. And you can probably explain us the role of the international investors in this decision, and yeah, so that we can understand if there are the differences we can observe probably from the European approach. Kerstin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Annette, and thanks also for the invitation. I'm happy to being part of the discussion here today. So the decision process towards the development of European sustainability standards, well, we headed off with the non-financial reporting directive that was adopted in 2014. And since the adoption of the NFRD, we have, of course, mandatory non-financial reporting for large listed companies, banks, and insurance companies. So the NFRD leaves some flexibility for the reporting companies. For example, it does not require the use of a certain non-financial reporting standard, nor does it require detailed disclosure requirements. And in 2020, the EU Commission reviewed the NFRD, and they found a lot of things, and some takeaways were that there is a lack of comparability and of reliability and relevance of the non-financial accounting information. And another finding was that there is strong support for the use of a common reporting standards, which supports the global baseline that we are discussing here. And there were some other things like the support for stricter audit requirements. And yeah, starting off with the NFRD, in April 2021, the European Commission then adopted the proposal for a corporate sustainability reporting directive. And that replaces now the NFRD. And yeah, after the discussions between Parliament, Council and Commissions, the finalized CSRD was at least published in June 2022. why I'm pointing that out, because we have right now so we were talking about investors, and the CSRD has the so-called multi-stakeholder approach as well as the double materiality. And that was already part of the NFRD. And from a sustainability reporting perspective, it makes sense. And that's why we still have it. And to your second question, Annette, international investors. So when we talk about international investors, I think it's all investors, right? So they, of course, have a need for information that is coming from a financial perspective, but that's also coming from an impact perspective. And especially that is the interest, I think, of international investors. And that's part of our CSRD.
Okay, thank you, Kerstin. Before probably discussing about those different approaches or to see if we can find a common understanding of the global baseline, I want to come to Christina Watt, to the American side, and to ask her what is the role of the American capital market in the discussion of a global baseline, and probably as well to come to the SEC, what's the SEC's mandate concerning ESG reporting? Christina, happy to hear you.
It's a pleasure to be.
Oh yeah, hello.
Oh,
it's not so good. I think we don't really hear her. Can you see what's happening?
The mic is far away.
Oh, you have to approach. Can you talk to her that she has to approach her micro? It's a bit. It's really, Christina. It's a bit. It's not very loud for us. We can't understand really.
Okay, well, just a moment. I will start plugging in a headset. Okay. Sorry, this worked better in the technical prep.
We can.
You hear me now? Yes, good. Good, thank you. My apologies. The technical prep worked better than this worked. So thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I should preface this by saying that while I worked at the SEC last year, I no longer work at the SEC, and so I am not speaking for the SEC. I am just speaking for myself, and so my comments should not be taken as representative of the SEC. But I will say that the work that I did during that time gave me a perspective on the importance of the establishment of a common global baseline. The SEC was very involved with the IFRS Foundation in working toward the establishment of the prototype standard that contributed to the standards that the ISSB ultimately proposed for its consultation. Specifically, the SEC co-led the technical experts group of IOSCO along with the Monetary Authority of Singapore in the evaluation of and commenting on the prototype standard that had been put together by the alliance of the various different standard setters that Mr. Faber mentioned. The focus at this point was significantly impacted by the demand of investors, as you all have noted, for more consistent, comparable sustainability disclosure. We were quite focused on the issue that we were hearing about the concern that there was a fragmentation in the various reporting standards. The alphabet soup, as Mr. Faber mentioned, was a real concern. And of course, we were quite focused on the fact that many companies operate and report in multiple jurisdictions, and that there is significant interdependence among companies. And so all of this pointed to the importance of having a common global baseline to help to reduce the burdens on companies and to give investors the consistent, comparable, decision-useful information that they need to make their investment decisions. And even where different jurisdictions operate under different legal statutory mandates that might cause their regulations to differ in scope or focus, there's a recognition that having a common baseline can be quite important to help to foster consistency in reporting and reduce the reporting burdens for companies. And finally, it's important to the extent possible that where we look to measure certain issues, like, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, that those measurements are done in a consistent way so that even where there are differences in the various regulations that are adopted around the world, that the thing that you're measuring is measured in accordance with the same measuring stick, so to speak. And so all of this work fed into not only the prototype standard that was offered up to the ISSB and that I think influenced the ISSB's proposal, its proposed standards, but it also influenced the SEC's thinking, I believe, in coming up with its own proposed climate disclosure rules, which were proposed in March of this past year and underwent consultation. And at this point, the SEC is considering the many thousands of comment letters that were submitted on that proposed rulemaking and is expected to come out with final rules at some point here. Thank you.
Interesting, Christina. So we will go on talking about the proposals, but I hand over to Nobu just now to understand what we have to understand, or if we have to know from the Japanese markets. Are there other insights, or how do you perceive the global baseline from the investors' view on the global baseline in Japan?
Okay, thank you very much, Janet. It is my pleasure and honor to participate in this prestigious event. Regarding your question, first I'd like to note that nearly 70% of the trade volume in the Japanese capital markets involve trade by foreign investors, meaning non-Japanese investors. So if we are to meet the needs of these international investors, that means that we do need to follow the global norm, which is the needs of the global investors that require information in other capital markets. And so in that sense, we don't think there's a significant difference between the needs in the Japanese market versus other markets. Having said that, some risks may be more important in the Japanese context compared to others. For example, a company operating in Japan is usually exposed to risks caused by earthquakes. That is a common theme that company needs to think about when doing business in Japan. Whereas we hear little concerns about risks related to water management because we are based on a lot of islands with a lot of water surrounding us. So in that sense, there may be differences in where we have focus on the disclosures, but still the general needs should not be that different. One thing that we, as the Sustainability Standards Board of Japan and the regulators are working on, is the sustainability disclosures that are to be included in the securities reports that are filed with the securities laws and regulations. And in that context, we do focus on the capital providers as the primary users. That is more consistent with the ISSB proposals, whereas I think we've heard from the European proposals that they have a more broader users in mind. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the difference to the EU proposal. So, Georg, as I know, or as we have spoken about it, that the German capital market and has strongly supported the settlement of the ISSB in Frankfurt. How are the needs of international investors concerning sustainability reporting perceived in Germany?
I think I can echo a lot what also Inobu has said in the end, in terms of like the importance of international investors for the financing, in particular of the larger German listed companies. From an investor perspective as such, I would say we have also in the end bigger players in Germany. It's perhaps also that the financing is partly in the end also partly a banking loan market. However, in the end, if you look at simply those requests and what is in the end moving also in the end this way, listed companies in Germany in particular, is again this fear of alphabet soup and how is this now translating into this new world of regulation. And I think State Secretary Strasser in the end described this very well in the sense in the end we have to bring here a certain like uniform language into that, not that everything needs to be the same, but in the end the starting point is certainly that we need to cater to this community, and I think this has been taken up by the Germans in the end in a good way, and we've discussed also earlier on, and you said also this in the end move to Frankfurt in the end of the, would say, the chairman's office of the board is certainly has been a broad support here in the end to expressing the end this need for this I would say global baseline approach and the support for this idea. We have done so as a German standard setter very clearly also towards Brussels, and we've got in this way a parallel move here. And this has also been already mentioned. In the end, we've got now the final phase here of the first 13 sector agnostic standards, where we in the end try to find the final, would say, agreement. And I think find this very positive in the sense that we get here to an alignment, hopefully also that we can discuss later on. But we have been fairly clear right from the beginning, this is important for us, and also the support, a broad support, private sector, private and public sector, in the end working very well together here to in the end attract also the ISSB to Frankfurt, I think is really underpinning this need for global baseline.
So thank you very much for this first round of the discussion. Probably just a remark that Kerstin said that there's or as Nobo as well reflected, that there's a different approach somehow, not really that's seen in the same way from, for example, Japanese markets or the international market concerning the impact materiality then of the company's activities. But we can discuss this later on, and now we're coming to the second part of the discussion about the efforts, existing efforts to reach a consistent set of national regional standards building on the global baseline, because this we can see. We have seen the Americans having proposals and the Europeans, and we have the ISSB and discussing on the global baseline. So Christina, again, because the SEC proposed rules foresee disclosures as part of the forms to be filed with the SEC, how and to which degree does these SEC forms allow to build on the global baseline? Probably you can explain us a bit more about the proposal of the SEC in regard of the global baseline.
Sure, thank you. I think that one thing that's quite critical is that if you read the SEC proposal, there is quite a lot of discussion in the front part of the release about the TCFD and how it's a significant organizing framework for thinking about sustainability and climate-related risks and opportunities in particular. Under the current SEC reporting requirements, companies have quite a bit of flexibility to determine what information to report. The existing requirements are largely principles-based, and the SEC has said that companies should report on their climate-related risks as appropriate in their forms 10K and 20F under the Commission's existing rules, and this guidance has existed since 2010. The SEC has received quite a bit of feedback from the investor community, as well as some feedback from the issuer community, saying that there's a need for greater clarity as to what information should be reported. Investors have said that they need to have more consistent and comparable information on which to base their investment decisions. And so the SEC proposal that came out in March proposes that there be disclosure in annual reports on Form 10K, or for foreign private issuers that they're who are reporting on Form 20F, that there be comparable disclosures to those that would be required in the Form 10K. And these proposals are a combination of principles-based, meaning that the proposed rules articulate principles that reporting companies should follow when crafting their disclosures, as well as prescriptive, more directive line item requirements, and particularly line item requirements related to greenhouse gas reporting. And so as such, the proposals are designed to foster consistency in reporting on certain key metrics, but they're also designed to be flexible, to offer flexibility for companies to report beyond those key metrics to the extent that additional disclosures are called for by the principles that are articulated in the rules. Further, the SEC rules don't limit companies in what they can report. That is to say that companies can go beyond the SEC's articulated rules as long as what they say is truthful and not misleading.
Okay, thank you. So probably for the room discussion, we don't have the discussion on that the ESRS or the European sustainability standards proposed are limiting the companies to report. That's not our point. So for Kerstin, how is Europe dealing with the need to reach a consistent set of sustainability standards? Does the final CSRD offer enough ground to actively consider the global baseline? What is the state of play so far in Europe?
Yeah, well, in Europe it is as follows. The EU gave, or the EU Commission gave EFRAG the mandate to develop sustainability standards, and EFRAG formed the SRB. And I said it before, we have the multi-stakeholder approach. So if you look at the composition of the SRB, it documents also the multi-stakeholder approach to reach a consistent set of sustainability standards. The EU gave us also a really tough timeline, and that makes it a little bit difficult for us to align. We are taking a lot of effort into that to align with the ISSB, and I as a chair do that, of course, too. The CSRD offers, from my perspective, and I mean everybody can read it, sufficient ground to actively consider the global baseline, because the CSRD says that European standards should reduce the risk of inconsistent reporting requirements on companies by integrating the content of global baseline to develop by the ISSB. And I think that gives us enough ground to move forward with that. We, of course, have to have in mind that we have to follow other EU legal frameworks that we have, as well as following the Green Deal. But I think the ISSB will not go against that. So I see a lot of ground for alignment regarding that.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. So we move to Nobu again. What role can the Asian market or Japan play to turn the global baseline into reality? Are there already plans in Japan to have an own sustainability reporting regime?
Yes, thank you, Annette. First of all, we strongly believe that it is important that Asian countries also adopt the ISSB standards, or otherwise they are not truly global or international standards. Having said that, Asian countries will make their own decision for each jurisdiction, and I unfortunately do not know what each jurisdiction is thinking right now. However, the IFRS Foundation does have an office in Tokyo, and it is expected that they currently work on accounting issues, but I expect that they will work on sustainability reporting issues as well in the future. And I also think that they will gather the information of the developments in each jurisdiction so that the headquarters of the ISSB will have the information about the developments in the Asian area. Regarding the situation in Japan, late this year or next year, the securities regulator is expected to revise the form to be submitted to the for securities filing purposes. And in that form, it is expected that for those companies in the Tokyo Stock Exchange that are classified in the prime market, which is intended to meet the needs of global investors, they will follow the TCFD recommendations. The Sustainability Standards Board of Japan has not developed standards yet. The legal status will be determined later this year or maybe early next. And depending on that, we will develop standards for the filing, are likely to develop standards for those filings. And it is likely that we will put in more details on how to report within the forms, in addition to what is required by the TCFD recommendations. So I think that's that will come in the near future.
Oh, that's interesting. Just to, because we know in Europe we will have our European sustainability standards, but so it won't be enough just to have an endorsement process in Japan to adopt the ISSB standards. There's even a need for regional or the national own sustainability standards.
I think the idea is that we endorse the building block approach, where we start with the global baseline, and if there's anything in addition to that global baseline, we do it as our own jurisdictional initiative. And so I think that's how we are currently designing the requirements.
Okay. Well, we probably can come to this later, because we were already we heard already from the Ministry of Justice that there is the expectation that the ISSB goes beyond. So then there's the question of interoperability, if you already have your own standards, or what we can see for Europe. Probably, Georg, well, I wanted to ask you the role of the national standard setter to achieve consistency with the global baseline. Probably this comes, it's good to have which, to answer a bit or have thoughts about what Nobu just said as well, how to cope with the baseline.
I think the challenge was also there for Germany. As I said, we tried to deal with this early on, and also with the help of the Ministry of Justice in order to transform our own organization, in order to also be able to play a role, be it at European, be it at international level. So first, in the end, we transformed ourselves also in a, I would say, two-pillar structure, with not only having financial reporting, but also sustainability reporting, something that we already been able to close then in December last year in this transformation, and also directly taking up this challenge. I said, on the one hand, we worked on this international project in terms of like attracting, certainly trying to attract the ISSB also to Germany, and on the other hand also actively engaging in Europe. And this is certainly the question of EFRAG, and in the end being there present, this also requires financial needs, it requires of course also technical needs. And we said we have set up a separate committee at the same, I would say, it's giving the same importance as financial reporting. This is certainly a commitment and also a dedication, and also transforming our technical staff in that regard. So we can actively play a role, and I think also in the end how we engage here with EFRAG is constructively, but also again always pointing to this need for international global baseline, in the end also being visible and identifiable in those standards. This is something that is also dear to us, and I think with Kerstin, and she is in the end also the chair of our climate reporting committee, we in the end asked her to represent us on the Sustainability Reporting Board, and thereby also supporting certainly that mission that we have as a national standard setter. And I see a lot of, in this way, good response also with other European countries here, in the end having similar objectives, but at the moment I think we're a little bit of a front runner at the moment still, like in what we are doing, and this will certainly happen also in other jurisdictions, at least in the European Union, and I think there we will find a good outcome, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. So I made Emmanuel waiting until all the other participants answered my question. So I want to know from Emmanuel now, from his perspective, how advanced are considerations of a global baseline so far, or what can help in the process of implementing a global baseline? What are your thoughts about the approaches or the efforts taken in America, in Japan, in Europe?
Thank you, Annette. Well, and I'd like to just, by the way, thank Georg and the whole German team that led to my office being in Frankfurt. It's been an incredible support for us. And I think that what Georg has just explained is very aligned with what we are trying to do. Having said that, also maybe a brief comment on Kirsten's comment about the CSRD and what Minister Strasser said just before our panel. I also, as Kirsten, I think that there is ample room in the CSRD's final wording for not only this alignment, as much as Kirsten said, the European standards are meant to incorporate the ISSB work as much as possible, as long as this is aligned with the EU's policy objectives, of course. And second, there is also the fact that Europe is expected to contribute to the global baseline and build the global baseline. And so the issue in Europe, I think, is two points. One of them has been mentioned by Kirsten, which is timing. Timing is really, really difficult now. And the second is the fact that both the European efforts and the international efforts started in parallel without dialogue to start with. Europe was on a political mandate, let's put it this way. The international efforts did not start were not officialized, I would say, as fast as what Europe had started. So Europe had already built a significant piece of work that did not start from the same page, although there are some, obviously, and I'm also, as Kirsten, pleased that on climate in particular, we are in substance, I think, quite close. But we know there are other differences. And the fact that the IFRS started with the consolidation of a number of international standard setters were not, that is a very different approach to what Europe did, actually. So we also have substantive points to discuss. But I think that to your point about, and I'm allowing myself this comment about Europe, Annette, because you're mentioning where are we in the building of the global baseline. I think the European chapter is obviously a very important one. Christina mentioned about the SEC, and yes, SEC has been working with the TRWG before we finalized our standard proposals. We've also had a dialogue with the SEC around their own proposals that were issued just before ours during spring, and we have continued that dialogue. Nobu was mentioning about Japan, where now Japan has established a sustainability board for Japan to discuss and connect with our own work. And maybe I will take Nobu's word, because for me that is the fundamental aspect, building block. We will not meet the need of global capital markets if there is not a building block approach. We do not intend to cover everything, but it's a comprehensive baseline, first of all. So it's meant to meet the need of very sophisticated investors from very sophisticated corporates. That is there. But it is not meant to address non-investor focused stakeholders or capital providers, put it this way. So, banks and others, and all of that is part of our primary users. And we therefore recognize the opportunity and the need for jurisdictions to build upon our building blocks. That's the first point. The second is the proportionality. We cannot ask SMEs the same thing as large companies. We cannot ask emerging countries, the same thing as what we would request from or propose for very advanced economically and financially advanced countries and jurisdictions. So that proportionality and progressivity, I think, is fundamental. And the third aspect, and we are working on this, we are going to announce in the coming days and weeks significant strategies to build that progressivity and that global inclusiveness. We cannot succeed, to be clear, we cannot succeed on things like climate if we do not have Global South with us, if we do not have Africa, and how do we achieve a just transition? That cannot exist. And the same if we don't have China or Asia, Japan, and others. So it is a topic where, well-functioning capital markets that provide capital allocations in a manner that's fully informed on climate topics in particular, to start with, is a common good. And that's a common good that's commonly held by jurisdictions. And we are a platform to convene that. So the interoperability of the systems is absolutely fundamental. And I will maybe just finish in saying that we've gone way beyond what what accounting the IASB has been doing or is doing right now in reaching out because of the momentum of sustainability. And we discuss climate, but just after there's need, water is a huge topic right now, and we know that. So it's going to be a follow-on very soon, and biodiversity and the social aspect of the transition, etc., etc. We cannot succeed without a strong involvement of jurisdictions. And the three examples that we have here with Europe, US, and Japan is showing that. And that's the reason why we created a jurisdictional working group where actually Nobu is part of it, where we with Japan, China, UK, Europe, and US, we regularly meet and discuss where everyone is in their own governance and strategy about sustainability, the organization from a regulatory, legal standpoint, the opportunities for alignments, and the priorities for discussion. This is important. I don't think that's enough. The only thing I can say is that ultimately there is a collective ownership of the success of our initiative. We will not succeed alone. And that's why we very much welcome the SECs, the FRAGs, and of course the Japanese involvement in our work.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. So the building block approach, yeah, it's clear. And I just learned that, yeah, sure, with water and other issues, it's an ongoing process. But still, as we heard from Japan or SEC, it's the investor-focused information, which is here at the first place. And the building block approach is adding other information and other areas and topics, but still to be investor-focused, as I understood. I want to, because we can discuss and I can open the discussion, because we know that we have, in the consultant process for the European standards, the integrated reporting, the possibility for integrated reporting was key for us. And unfortunately, in the CSRD, in the directive, the last negotiations failed to got this again into the CSRD, so we probably can discuss about that. Emmanuel, again, to explain to us, because there's just this summer there was published the cooperation between ISSB and ISSB on integrated reporting. How do you see the developments there, and as well I don't know, and what will result from this for the European way?
Yeah, well, thank you, Annette, to ask. I think there are two things in the integrated reporting framework as far as we are concerned. One is about process and the other is about substance. In terms of process, the fact that now the International Integrated Reporting Council is part of the ISSB and the IFRS Foundation, it's really our legacy, it's an asset, and it's a process that we want to implement. So the principle of integrated reporting is going to be in the hierarchy a high-level information. It will inform the connectivity between IASB and ISSB. I do not see an immediate urgency to work on these topics, but it's a guiding handrail, I would say, in establishing the connectivity processes between IASB and ISSB. Because I personally believe that one of the strengths of our proposition at the international level is that we sit on the very solid foundation of the IFRS standards to build our own, even though we are agnostic from an accounting standard standpoint, yet the existence of IASB is a huge kickstart for us and platform for us. That is about the process. Now, in terms of the substance, I think the interest of integrated reporting is not yet reflected in the world of sustainability in the way it could. In particular, because what it establishes is the fact that no company can succeed in an ecosystem that does not succeed. And they have established these notions of capitals, so human capitals and financial and manufacturers and natural capitals. The essence for me of that IR thinking is that you cannot succeed as a business if you are not part of a regenerative process of those capitals. If you extinguish those capitals, if you do not replace them. So there is a direct connection between a thriving ecosystem, whatever the nature of that, natural, people, or financial ecosystem, and the thriving of a company and a business. That is the essence of what IR is. And I think it can be a very high level encapsulating view of what in our remit of investor focus, sustainability related disclosures we are doing, but that can also encapsulate, as I just said, other stakeholders' approach beyond our own focus on investors.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. Probably someone wants to add, but I can ask Kerstin. Well, she's not responsible for the CSRD, and probably, I don't know, you can answer personally. You wish probably as well from the academic point that the possibility of integrated reporting remains with the CSRD concerning the new sustainability reporting obligations. But what do you think about those, like Emmanuel explained right now, the perspective of integrated reporting? What do you think about it from the European perspective so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, companies are using integrated reporting, and abandon it wouldn't make sense. I mean, they're used to it. Also, the not only the preparers, also the users of the reports. So it does make sense, and also the referencing to that. Yeah, and from my scientific perspective, I can only support that. Although, as you said, it's not in the CSRD. And we had that in a discussion in the board, but yeah, not finalized yet.
To someone else about because I learned always that it's about the steering function as well, that we are working with KPIs, but what was needed that the management is working with the KPIs. Probably this for me, this is investor focused information, but has anybody else an insight on this or a remark before we go on with the discussion? Yeah?
Annette, perhaps a short remark on that. In the end, we certainly have not only this is investor, we've got also that topic of proportionality. This is one thing in the end. If you say start steering and these KPIs need to be used, that is something that is, I think, also in the financial reporting space, in the management reporting, for us, it's something that we had for as a so-called, enshrined in our standards already. Regarding, in the end, question of integrated reporting. This certainly, we can continue integrated reporting, but in the end it would need to double reporting, and this is something which in essence we wanted to avoid. This is certainly a pity that this was the outcome of the CSRD, and we had also issued some, I would say, call here for integrated reporting in the end. I think this was not only us, also others in the end, because in the end we have some, I would say, prime examples also in Germany. I think there was already now a move to that. If you look at, for example, then so I think we have BASF, you have EnBW, we've got BMW with a new kind of reporting. So it seems it's a pity in the end. At the moment, it rather leads to perhaps a bit more confusion than actually helping this. Yeah.
Just to understand, Nobu, for the Japanese market, how is the application of integrated reporting in Japan?
Integrated reporting is still voluntary. So there's no requirement to do so, and I currently am not aware of any discussions of it so far.
Okay, so you don't have, well, there's probably no need, like here in Europe. The third part from the discussion I put down here, interoperability, difficult word, we just heard about it. But I think what we understood here is that we have now different solutions. And the question is still there, how interoperability can be assured. And probably it's not about, Nobu, I put down the question, but you're just at the point to have your own sustainability reporting. So probably, but overall, probably for others as well. Are there, because we are still in the consultation process, are there changes needed to the ISSB draft standards to assure interoperability? Yeah, you can answer or other.
So maybe 2 points. The first is that, well, wearing my hat as an accounting standard judge, the IASB has discussed the general principles of disclosures in the past few years. And one of the points that has come up is that standard setters should not come up with a list of requirements that lead to a very long checklist. It's not that's probably not useful, and following that checklist is probably not does not lead to the best combination of information to be provided. So we suggest that the requirements be more objective based. What is the objective, and to allow entities to choose the best way to achieve those objectives. So that would be our first point, and that would actually be more compatible with the local requirements that may exist. That's my first point. The second is, while we generally endorse the whole package of requirements that are proposed as the global baseline, there is a diversity in terms of how entities are advanced in terms of doing these kind of sustainability reporting activities, and therefore it seems like implementing all of these requirements in one stop seems to be overwhelming to some entities, and therefore we do suggest a realistic timeline to implement these requirements. And maybe the issue is where to draw the line between the 2 or 3 phases if we are to phase the proposals. But it seems like doing it in one shot is would be very challenging.
Okay. Because you commented as well the ISSB standards, Georg, DSC, you have other points to add? What just Nobu said?
I think in the end, we discussed this in our technical committee, and in the end submitted also our comments. There are some certainly aspects that can be improved. It's always, if you have something that is done in a very short time span, that there's still room for improvement. But in the end, overall, I think we had been very supportive in the end of the the proposals, and can work on some concepts, and in the end also smoothen the integration of sector-specific requirements, etc. But in the end, overall, I think we are fairly happy.
Okay. So I come to Kerstin, because I know there are tough talks and a lot of talks going on. I just had information from Business Europe, so there are meetings with the ISSB and the EFRAG Sustainability Standards Board solving some problems. And probably you just can give us some insights about the talks going on and what topics are talked about after the consultation period ended for the European standards.
Yes, certainly, Annette. Thank you so much. So Mr. Strasser also pointed out the dialogue that is important, and I think that's what we are working on. So assuming that the ISSB is developing the global baseline, we try, of course, to align the ESRS as well in content as well as in wording. As said before, I mean, we have S1 and S2, and ESRS will be the whole set. So yeah, we work on that. We had several bilateral meetings at management level, and we also had several bilateral meetings, especially of the climate experts. And yeah, we talk with each other. As said, we try to align as much as possible. It's a lot of work, and I think the ISSB is very supportive. So I talked to Emmanuel. We also had Sue in an SRB meeting to talk about double materiality. So from my perspective, it's running very good. And thanks so much, Emmanuel, for supporting that. And yeah, so I see, you know, as I said, so at least we communicate and we try to align. And I think that's also not only my aim as a chair, it's also the aim of the whole SRB to do that, as mentioned in the CSRD.
Thank you. They have a question because the consultant periods ended both for ISSB and the EFRAG Sustainability Standard Board. And just a question for Emmanuel, because, well, we know there are talks going on. How far can the ISSB go to align to the ESRS? Because I just got a note that we know that from the stakeholder and the materiality approaches differ. And this is the question, because is this a reason? Is this possible that the ISSB aligns?
Well, I think it's difficult, but it's possible, and I would like to echo Kirsten's thanks for her own openness and very cooperative spirit in this process. And I recognize that our friends in Europe are working under a huge amount of pressure. Not that we are not, but they are certainly even more than we are. And yet, I think both ISSB and Europe, in the momentum of building, you know, the foundations of what will be a global, comprehensive set of interoperable disclosures in sustainability, all these two efforts are fundamental. And aligning or not aligning is a huge difference for the future. And so, as long as we are still before the deadline, I will try to create the alignment. I do not believe that in and by itself, the investor focus of ISSB is a problem to align. There is a recognition of the notion of financial materiality in the EFRAG work today. We might have to refine and define the exact definition, the wording, as Kirsten was mentioning, or at least align the substance. But as long as there is the recognition that an intersection of there is an intersection between what IFRS is working on and what EFRAG is working on, and we deal with the alignment within this intersection, I think that is the goal that we should pursue. And that, as Kirsten said, our teams are gradually trying to find ways to go deeper into that situation. So yeah, I do not believe, and again, I will stop there, but I do not believe that you know, investor materiality and impact materiality are opposed. I think they are complementary. And this is actually one of the reasons why, as soon as I started, literally weeks after that, we announced a global strategic cooperation agreement with GRI, you know, in order to provide a seamless suite of solutions for companies that want or have to report on a multi-stakeholder basis, with standards that would not be overlapping, that would not be missing anything in the middle, but again, be very organized in a manner that it provides a cost-effective and decision-useful solution on a multi-stakeholder basis. And again, I'm just sharing this to say that I do not see both being opposed. I see them complementary. And I went public and wrote recently that I felt that I'm convinced that the international capital markets are the best and should actually be considered as the best ally for the jurisdictional policies when it comes to sustainability, and certainly when it comes to climate. And so look at international capital markets as an ally, not as something that is opposed because we focus on one part only of the global impact.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. Very good to hear. Concerning GRI, I'm interested in how Christina is, how the application of GRI is common in the US and probably in Japan, just to understand. Christina first, probably.
Sure. So I think on the question of sort of single versus double materiality, I do think I agree that particularly with regard to climate, that there is a significant area of intersection, and it's almost a matter of perspective in terms of whether you're looking from the company outward and looking at the impact that the company has on society versus the impact that climate has on the company. And the TCFD framework, which the SEC proposal as well as the ISSB proposal are constructed on, provides a very useful analytical framing for thinking about how climate-related risks and opportunities represent financial risks and opportunities. And so I think that the difference, as viewed through the TCFD lens, between financial materiality and broader double materiality becomes increasingly small. There might be a difference in sort of the timeline for realizing the financial impacts, but at the end of the day, I think that the difference is probably overemphasized, and that the point of intersection is quite significant, as Emmanuel I think alluded to. In terms of GRI, I really can't I can't speak to sort of where the SEC is with regard to its endorsement of GRI, but I think on that issue of the impact versus the broader impact versus the financial impact, that the SEC proposal goes a very long way to capturing that point of intersection by means of the TCFD.
Okay, thank you. And Novo, just to understand the GRI importance from the Japanese market.
Yes, I don't have the exact numbers, but quite a few companies that do have worked on sustainability reporting do report on GRI, so it is quite popular in Japan.
Well, I have another point I noted here for the interoperability. A question is about the third country obligation, reporting obligation. We see this in the CSRD, and we have this as well while coming from the SEC forms. The issuers have to file. So probably first to you, Georg, how does this probably allows interoperability? Is there sort of mutual recognition possible? Or?
I think in the end there's some particular requirement on third country entities that have operations in the EU with a certain, I think 150 million euros, that they would fall under a specific regime of the CSRD in order to report. I think this is, for me, rather another case where I think this is really important to have this global baseline approach. In the end, to have this also a seamless exercise for those third country. Imagine simply like being there, coming from a third country, having significant operations in the EU, and then you have to all of a sudden follow different requirements. And there I think it can really turn this, or could in the end even like strengthen in the end the global baseline approach, in the sense if this is done properly, and could also in the end serve as a, I would say, for global recognition purposes, as a common language. So I think for me this could be an advantage in the case we do this in the right way in Europe. If this is done certainly in a way trying to complicate things, then it could backfire on us. Also, I think it was mentioned always, also I think the Financial Times could also mention this as a potential downside even for Europe if this was in the end developed in that direction.
Mm-hmm. And for the American market, Christina, do you think it's reasonable to think that there will come a mutual recognition, like we have this for IFRS, thinking of the future sustainability reporting requirements?
In the proposed rules, the proposals provide for modification to Form 20F, which applies to foreign private issuers, as well as to Form 10K. So the proposals themselves would effectively apply the same US rules to foreign private issuers as to domestic issuers. There is a request for comment in the proposal as to whether there should be some form of recognition of other jurisdictions' reporting requirements, or acceptance of reporting pursuant to other requirements, and that I'm sure the Commission is considering on the basis of comments that have been submitted, and I look forward to seeing how they come out on that. After the final rules are adopted. I do think that the recognition of international accounting standards after some time is a positive sign, but whether there will be a similar kind of recognition in the absence of the rules actually saying so, I think we'll have to see over time.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm here at the end of my questions I noted, though I already asked some more. And but probably just because this was mentioned, the tough timeline and the pressure we have in Europe. I don't know, probably Christian can told us, because I haven't seen it so far. Was the announcement that the results of the consultation on the European sustainability standards will be published end of August? As we see, there's already an Excel sheet, but it's difficult to get out the report out of this. But already it was interesting to see. Probably you can just tell us a bit about the consultation process and the outcomes and what we can expect to see in the days or weeks to come.
So we are still working on the results, as you can see. So I can't tell that much. It's I think most of the things we are seeing in the consultation are not surprising, because we had the outreach events, and the points raised over there were also raised in the consultation papers. So I can't really tell, because I haven't seen that much either.
Okay, thank you. I just saw that we had another questions I just forgot. That's right, and this was data availability, because we see all over the stakeholders or constitution that we will have electronic formats, and so this is a question of data availability, and we just want to discuss at the end on this topic. So where we are standing concerning data availability, and how important is that, and how could it be organized? I have not written down someone to start with. Probably we can start with Georg. Or
perhaps to shed a bit of light from the it's again the European perspective, perhaps in the end. Simply that we are, and I think this happens at the ISSB level in the end, working on a taxonomy. There's also an ongoing consultation regarding, let's say, the basic design, but also in the European context, certainly a desire to build taxonomies. This is something in the end where we've only seen a glimpse so far as a kind of proof of concept on climate reporting, something that needs to be done also fairly quickly, and something that's going to happen in the EFRAG context. What is certainly the question is, as I mentioned, data availability. As a European project, we also have this European single access point as a kind of infrastructure measure, also currently being negotiated, I think also fairly advanced, at least on the council side. And this is somehow an attempt to bring together in the end various, I would say, registers and in the end provide company data, and I would say in a concerted way with a single access at European level. And this is something to be placed at ESMA. So this is going to be important in order to satisfy the needs in the end, again, be it investors, but also others in this context, in order to get those the data readily available, and also hopefully without bigger language barriers.
So for Europe, but is this a global approach as well? For Christina, for example, from the SEC side, do you have electronic formats concerning sustainability reporting?
The SEC proposal does provide for XBRL tagging of the information. In terms of the consistency, I think that it's important that there be consistency in terms of the development of taxonomies, so that the information can be used as intended, and so that investors can make use of that electronic tagging. And I also think that the increasing development of electronic tools and software tools to help with, particularly on climate, the generation of greenhouse gas reporting information in a way that's easier and more comparable and more reliable will be quite important to helping companies to be able to report in a way that's less expensive and more dependable, and then also to enable companies to make better use of that information, and to enable investors also to rely on that information and be able to make better use of it. So I think it's, from my perspective, there are two issues. One is the reporting of greenhouse gas emissions and facilitating that, and then the other is on tagging of information in an XBRL format and coming up with some kind of consistent taxonomy.
Thank you very much. So this is what we discussed in Europe, has in you as well, that it's really important as well to have a better access and to cost points, burden points for the companies. But just question to finish with that, but is Europe or the Commission aware that we need a global approach concerning taxonomy, and in view of the ISSB, which has a long tradition with taxonomy, and the ESF, the European Electronic Format for Financial Reporting, relies on the taxonomy. So there are thoughts that there should really be a cooperation with the ISSB on that.
Yeah, I only get a couple of the sentences. Sorry, I had a bad connection, but
if you are aware,
you're talking about
the European the electronic format, if you're aware that there should be a global approach to realize then the global baseline.
Yeah, that's definitely desirable to have that. I mean, Georg already said that, and that's definitely desirable to have the globally access point for the data.
This is still something where we have to work on. I know that this point was a bit forgotten probably in the big discussion, so it's just to emphasize that there we really need to have a success to have a global approach. So already we are nearly at the end of our discussion, and I want to thank you all. While I have planned to have closing remarks, so I will ask first, I will first round and then ask Emmanuel at the end, because we had this discussion too to support the ISSB and to turn the global baseline into reality. So I'll start with Snobo and then Georg and then with Kerstin and Christina, and at the end we will hear Emmanuel. And then for me it's I will say goodbye and thank you very much. so noble.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, the Japanese just set up the Sustainability Standards Board of Japan, and we are willing to work with the ISSB and other standard setters that are working in this process. We also want to work with the Asia Oceania office of the IFRS Foundation in Tokyo, so that we do participate in the process as one of the major jurisdictions in Asia. There is still a lot of debate, and there's a lot of timing issues that are coming up, but we do want to have good discussions and make sure that we have the right set of standards, so that the entities in our jurisdictions are happy to apply these standards. But anyways, we are looking forward to working with all of you, and thank you very much for today.
Yeah, thank you. And Georg?
Just briefly, I think we have at the moment two issues. One is certainly continuing support of the global baseline at European level, and Carsten described very well the time pressure that is behind that. At the same time, we certainly also has a big desire simply to cut down on reporting burdens in the end, and alignment will help reporting entities to, in the end, avoid double reporting. This is also very important, and achieving there, be it internationally, but also with a particular view here to Europe, to EFRAG, I would say a package that is in the end manageable in practice is fairly important.
So, Kerstin?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm adding on to Georg. That's from my SRB perspective. I mean, we have to deliver mid of November, and our aim is to deliver a set of standards that overcomes the downsides of the NFRD, as I said so far, and to make it possible for preparers and for users to have better sustainability information at the end.
So thank you very much. And Christina?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I would just say that I'm very encouraged by the accomplishments of the last year, and recognize at this point that we only have proposed rules and standards, so a lot of work still must be done. But I do believe that the establishment of the ISSB and the movement toward that common global baseline is extremely encouraging. And I'm also optimistic about the role of technology in enhancing the consistency and quality of reporting, and in reducing the costs and burdens to companies, and hope that we will move toward consistency and toward that global baseline as much as possible, and reduce the reporting burdens to companies and enhance the quality of information that's available to investors. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Emmanuel, it's to you to close our first panel here.
Thank you, Annette. It's an honor for me to close. I'd like, first of all, to thank you all on this panel for this rich and very open discussion. Simply to say again that I'm really conscious of all the challenges that are ahead of us. I think that the momentum is there. I know that there are challenges in a number of jurisdictions, which are not directly related to our work, of course, but the political circumstances and others, etc., are part of the complexity that we need to embrace. As I just said, I fundamentally believe that a global baseline of compatible, comparable, reliable disclosures on sustainability, and to start with climate, is a common good for all of us. Because the markets will move trillions of capital towards a more resilient economy and for the good of our businesses and our societies, if we inform them properly, and if on top of this, of course, there are the proper public policies in place, which starts to be the case. So despite the huge challenges, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the prize here, that collective prize, to really transform the way we count what counts and what doesn't count. And that's what I think any CEO I'm talking to now, any investor I'm talking to now, is deeply conscious of. So thank you very much for the support that you will bring to our work of convening part of that as a brick of solution for better working capital markets in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to you all. Thank you, Emmanuel. So it was an honor for me to have you all with me. And after the break, I hand over to Klaus Deutsch, my colleague from the financial department, and he will, first we will have the Ministry of Finance with us for a keynote, and then Klaus will chair the discussion on how companies will benefit, because we haven't had the companies here yet. It is the B7 conference, so we are waiting for them to cope and with the proposals and to see what will be the benefit from the use of a global baseline. So we will be here again at 2:30 then. So thank you very much for participating.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second part of the B7 conference on sustainability reporting. My name is Klaus Deutsch and I will be the moderator for the second panel. It's a pleasure for me to announce now our second guest speaker, Dr. Florian Tonka, Parliamentary State Secretary in the Ministry of Finance in Germany, and we are looking forward to your comments, Mr. Tonka.
Distinguished participants of this and I'm very thankful also for the opportunity to deliver some remarks in this keynote, as I think the conference addresses one of the key trends, both for financial markets as well as for the industry sector of our times. And despite all the challenges around the recent war, the assault, the Russian attack on Ukraine and its consequences, which indeed are deeply relevant for our future, I'm convinced that part of the solution is also looking on issues which we have to address anyway, accelerating these processes and the transition of our society, and taking the chances associated with these developments. And one of these mega trends on financial market is, of course, sustainable finance, and an element of it is the reporting on sustainability. So I indeed think there could be no better time to discuss this issue than these days here, and BDI is doing the right thing. The headline of the next panel and the headline of my keynote is how companies will benefit from the use of a global baseline. But maybe rephrasing it a bit could also be a right thing. How will companies benefit from the use of a global baseline? Because there is no one global baseline and there is no one standard company, but there are various interests. And of course, there are common interests between the various stakeholders in the issue, but also tensions between the requirements and the issues of the various stakeholders, which makes such a conference so valuable. And in particular, I think it's valuable that this time the initiative comes from the industrial sector and not merely from the financial sector, which is traditionally very, very close to that matter. We will need to adjust in this discussion, and this is the very heart of the challenge we are facing when we are defining appropriate reporting standards for sustainability. First of all, of course, the perspective of the investors, of the financial markets, their needs and requirements. There is undisputable a strong need to have certainty, to have confidence that a financial product and certain investment is sustainable. And without sufficient data, both in terms of quantity and quality, which is available to investors, this need will not be fulfilled, or a potential investor will turn to other economies which are more successful in giving him a certain comfort that his investment is indeed sustainable in a very, very broad sense. So investors have questions, they have needs, and they must also, of course, be addressed. On the other hand, we have the companies which have very specific abilities, capacities, resources, and the chances of their access to funding by capital markets, by investors which are oriented to sustainability, are of course also not in every case the same. We have, besides the traditional industry, the needs and interests of the smaller and medium-sized enterprises in Germany, the famous Mittelstand, which of course has other resources, naturally, obviously, and also another view on capital markets than the big industrial players. And all this must be brought together to create a framework which maximizes the overall benefit, in particular with regard to capital allocation, but also, of course, progress, transformation, and sustainability. And at the same time, which is sufficiently attractive also on the micro level for companies to participate in all forms of collecting these data and processing them and providing a good available picture for investors for them to decide where to invest. The German market is ideal as an environment for sustainable investment because we combine many strengths which are necessary in this process. We are the leading financial center in the European Union. We also have, of course, a strong economy with both large corporates, world famous brands, but also the Mittelstand, and both in very much, still very much engaged in the traditional industrial sector, which is under enormous transition pressure. So I think the German market is in particular very, very suitable for the testing and the application of sustainability reporting and sustainable finance. And so the ambition of the federal government in Germany is to make Germany a leading center for sustainable finance, which is also illustrated by the fact that we have appointed a high-profile advisory council headed by Silke Stremlau and Christian Heller, which is advising the government on all contemporary things related to sustainable finance, including reporting, which is one of the most important issues currently discussed on global level and on European level as well. We are very proud and very happy to have the ISSB with its headquarters in Frankfurt, which is working on the global baseline approach. We do think that one key factor for the general acceptance of the sustainability reporting approach is that we have common standards, as many as achievable, double standards or multiple standards for reporting are a burden for companies, may discourage even to participate in the whole process, and may slow down the transition to sustainability, which is the overall political goal. So there is a very strong need for as much common standard, as many common standards globally as achievable. And ISSB is a key player to deliver a baseline, which is the basis or forms the basis for regional, specific regional regulatory environments. We are very proud and very happy that the German presidency was able to find and to negotiate a clear commitment of the G7 to the work of the ISSB and the baseline approach behind it, because we do think if we won't succeed in the forming of a baseline, the whole process of developing financial markets and industries towards sustainability reporting will be less fruitful, and less companies will in the end benefit from the opportunities, the chances associated with access to sustainable oriented investors funding. So that is, of course, a key issue. We also need, in this process of forming common standards, we need to address the issue of various sizes of companies. For small and medium-sized enterprises, we also need to assess digital tools, for instance, to collect such data or to process it, to collect them. And we need sometimes we need standard approaches to define a certain carbon footprint, for instance. So we need, of course, also practical approaches which are both accurate enough to satisfy investors' needs and still practical for medium-sized enterprises to fulfill them. Because the SMEs will not only be addressed as direct addressees of reporting obligations, but also be addressed indirectly as far as they are suppliers to larger companies. They might well be asked by their companies to provide their data, their footprint, and then even many more companies than originally addressed could fall within the scope of certain reporting standards. And therefore we need indeed a proportionate and still an effective and meaningful approach to the collecting and the processing of sustainability data. And this will be the big challenge, and it can only be resolved when practitioners from the financial sector, as well as the bigger and smaller corporates, come together and discuss what can be achieved and how the best way to establish such standards will be. And that is a process we are, from the German perspective, we are supporting. It is in the interest of the whole economy, but it is also in the interest of all companies, irrespective of size or industry, that they are dealing with the sustainability aspects of their production chain, of their processes early enough that they take the chances of this process and don't miss them. And I think this is the key thing, where an appropriate, workable regulatory environment must be developed, which we are promoting and which we are supporting. Many thanks for the opportunity to deliver these thoughts and this input to you. And I'm indeed excited what the outcome of your conference and, of course, the further process will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. State Secretary, for your very valuable remarks. I think this highlights very well how important the topic is for the German government. We will now move on directly to our panel of very distinguished speakers, and I'm very happy to say a very warm welcome to Cristiano Borean, Group CFO of Generali, to Melanie Kreis, Chief Financial Officer of Deutsche Post, to Martin Maloney, Secretary General of IOSCO, to Pamela Steer, President and CEO of the Chartered Professional Accountants in Canada, and to Neil Stewart, who moved recently from ISSB to the IRFS Foundation. Now, as a way of beginning, I would like to start, because we are an industrial organization, with the CFO of Deutsche Post, and ask Ms. Kreis, how does Deutsche Post cope with a variety of sustainability reporting requirements, and how would the company benefit from a global baseline? And maybe you can indicate initially also how Deutsche Post in general copes with sustainability in that context. Thank you. Please go on.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here with you. So yeah, Deutsche Post DHL Group, we have had a very clear sustainability agenda for many, many years now. And maybe to give you just a bit of a background of what that means for us is we are a very global and international logistics company. We operate in 220 countries and territories. So we employ 580,000 colleagues around the world. And we have a very sizable CO2 footprint, about 40 million tons of CO2 emissions. So I think it's relatively clear what our ESG priorities are: reducing our CO2 footprint, being a great place to work for all our colleagues, and having the house in order and good governance wherever we operate. We focused very early on in making sure that we have very concretely defined targets around our sustainability agenda. And it was also clear, if you want to make tangible progress, you have to measure it. And that is where finance came into the game. We have been reporting key ESG KPIs through our financial reporting systems for over a decade now. So, for example, our CO2 footprint across scope 1, 2, 3 is reported through our financial systems. So for us, it is very natural that we now try to achieve the same, which we have had in financial reporting for many, many years: a common standard, clearly defined parameters, and then one reporting source of truth, which is serving all the different stakeholders. So I think we are a very strong supporter of ambitious sustainability goals. We have committed to the Science-Based Targets Initiative goals and so on. And we're also very much supportive of all the reporting convergence of standards. We are a member of the EFRAG Technical Expert Group. We are supporting the ISSB. So we are really trying to shape the agenda in a proactive way. At the same time, even for us, having been in that game for a long time, we are struggling to fulfill all the different reporting standards. I have kind of like, as a large company, the privilege to have a dedicated accounting and controlling team just focusing on sustainability reporting. Not many companies are able to afford that. And even for us, it is challenging to keep track of all the reporting requirements which are coming our way. As a European company, we clearly have to follow the European regulations. As a global company, we clearly have to comply with global regulations. We have lots of people, so we have lots of S topics, we have lots of E topics. It is overwhelming. And we are getting to a point now where if we don't manage this convergence and if we don't get to more focus, we will spend more time on reporting than on really doing something. Because what we should never forget is reporting is not an end to itself. It is an enabler to help us as organizations do the right thing and, for example, reduce our CO2 emissions. So I think we have to find a way to focus on the most important topics first, get high quality, clear definitions in place. So starting, for example, with scope 1, 2, and 3, get clear, accepted, unified definitions for that. And then we will have a competition not on who has the most beautiful ESG reporting, but who is really making the most progress on the ESG agenda, because that is what it's all about. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer. As you can see, I'm quite passionate about this topic.
No, you're actually perfectly fine in time. No problem with that. That even allows me to ask you a quick follow-up. In designing your own methods for reporting scope 1, 2, and 3, what have been the key challenges for that? Because for non-financial firms, that's obviously something that's not preordained from science or standards yet, but you have to do it from scratch.
Yeah, so for scope 1 and 2, it was relatively easy. Obviously, the big challenge for us as well has been scope 3. So our biggest challenge on the CO2 side are our aviation emissions. 2/3 of our CO2 footprint comes from aviation. And here we quite often also work with subcontractors, with airline partners flying for us. So as soon as you do something which is also touching subcontractors, the whole scope 3 part, that was obviously the most tricky. And I think here again, getting to clearer prescriptive definitions with a very clear boundary on what is in, what is out, with a very clear methodology of how things are calculated, I think that would already enhance transparency across the industry in a very fundamental way. So nothing basic about the basics. I think if we want to make traction on getting things moving on the content side in the right direction, we really have to focus and align first on the most impactful elements.
Thank you. Very interesting for me to learn. We switch now to those who are setting global standards, and I'm happy to have Mr. Maloney on board. As a standard setter, what's your vision for the adoption of global standards in the short and in the medium run? And what do companies have to expect maybe in the time frame of the next 2 or 3 years with all the run-up of standard setting? And how might the medium term look like? Where do you want to go to after that initial phase?
Thank you very much for the invitation to join you. And let me just start with a few remarks on where I'm hoping we'll be in the medium term, and then we can come backwards and talk about a little bit about how we get there. What I would like to be seeing in about 3 years' time is well-assured, audited corporate information coming out from companies that the markets trust, and the beginning of the build-up of an industry that is capable of cheapening the costs of gathering this information, that is analyzing this information, the most important point from the point of view of capital markets, and is getting us into a position at that point where markets are beginning to price much more than they do now the securities of companies on the basis of the quality of their sustainable finance position. because very often we think about sustainable finance at the moment as being in or being out. We think less and less about the quality of what companies are doing or achieving. And in order to get that sensitivity in the market to quality, you need the beginnings of the development of a specialized sector that is developing the qualitative and quantitative information, and that is analyzing that information in the same way brokers traditionally do for financial information, so that investors are really informed in ways that they are not informed at the moment. That's a tall order. That's not something that's going to happen just because we wish it. And the key to that, and I was very glad to see Emmanuel Faber on your earlier panel, is indeed good global standards. But you rightly raise a number of really substantial difficulties with getting there, because we've been pushing for a global baseline. But at the same time as having a global baseline, you also have to allow for a number of variations in the way jurisdictions look at this. Europe has a very particular set of ambitions in relation to sustainable finance. Others have a different approach. Traditionally, different parts of the world do their regulation and their supervision differently. We have to allow those differences to continue to exist. The industry will say, I want consistency as much as I can get it because I need to reduce costs. I need to simplify my processes so as to make them manageable. Absolute global consistency would probably be the most desirable thing for many of the largest companies. In a world of different jurisdictions, you're not going to get absolute consistency and complete consistency of definitions in a single global approach. But somewhere in between market fragmentation, just at the jurisdictional level, and a single global system, there is what I would call a sweet spot where we have sufficient global consistency in order to allow corporates to manage the costs that they face, and for the market to be able to develop on a global rather than on a regional basis, so people can understand that they have the same information. And that's what we're trying to achieve and what we're doing at the moment. But I really would not underestimate the challenges of that, both in allowing jurisdictions to do things differently and allowing them to have different sustainable goals and different degrees of ambition around the world. And we're working very closely with the ISSB and others to try to find that point where we have sufficient initial consistency. But of course, even when we find the initial point, that isn't the end of the story. The debate will go on thereafter, and you may find that you get more and more consistency over time as sustainable finance becomes a more and more important feature of investors' investment analysis.
Well, thank you for the brief intro in the topic. I would have again a follow-up question. As in particular, the equity market evolves very much in terms of the analysis and of the quality of sustainability reported by firms. There might be a long process of many years, maybe even 1 or 2 decades, in which these standards, tools of analysis, data requirements, and so on have to be adjusted. How do you think, will there be an inbuilt mechanism to adopt to these emerging market requirements, or insights into the necessities of what really has to be done? If you look at the standard economics on that, I think there's an appreciation that you don't get away with very simple mathematical tools right now, but you need to have very much in-depth quality analysis again. Now, with the market evolving, it might be the case that over time you get more and more different types of requirements. How do you envisage the interaction with markets along that dimension?
I have not the slightest doubt that you're correct. That is exactly what will happen. And one of the most welcome developments that we've got at this point in time is that people are not trying to do this as an add-on to something else. We're not only building standards, but we're building institutions and institutional capability to continue that process. So if you look at the way financial accounting standards have evolved over many decades, the reason that's able to happen is because there are guardians of those standards available to initiate consultation processes processes to realize that a tipping point has arrived where you need to actually change the standard. And when I see our own role in this, when I look at the establishment of the ISSB itself, which, it's important to recall, it was a merger of a number of voluntary standard setting bodies that came together to form the ISSB. That's very important. You get a locus of expertise within the ISSB that's able to deal with these issues in the future. When I see on the central banking side the establishment of the what they call the NGFS by the central banks to actually allow them to coordinate together around these issues, all that is part of a transition away from a decade where our approach has been dominated by voluntary enthusiasts bringing alliances together, both from civil society and from industry. And we're now trying to make the transition into a more structured, public sector-based standard setting process, which is exactly that, intended to serve us over a period of decades, particularly as government investment policies and government taxation policies and government regulatory policies evolve in terms of what they allow, what they promote, where they are investing in themselves. Because that, in a way, is the missing link in this whole process. That has not ramped up as much as the financial market focus on this area has ramped up. And it's only when both are firing on all cylinders that we'll really get to the kind of sustainable finance market that we're really trying to build here.
Well, thank you very much for this additional information. I think that's very helpful and worth mentioning, because it will be a longer process of establishing all these standards and of interacting. This leads me very well to our Canadian colleague on the panel, Ms. Pamela Steer. Canada is very much engaged in this whole international standard setting process, and so we are very happy to have you on board. The Economist recently quoted a colleague from your profession that sustainability reporting seems to be a full employment policy for the profession for years to come, because talent will be in short supply and there will be a huge demand for reporting, auditing, and all the rest of it. What are the key challenges for the audit profession from your point of view to turn the aspiration of high quality reporting and auditing into reality once standards become more material and real?
Well, thank you. I echo my colleagues. I really appreciate the invitation to today's conference. I think it's a really important group of topics to discuss among these groups. And first, I'd like to emphasize the importance as a profession that we take our public interest responsibility really seriously. I appreciate the colleague who made the quote to The Economist. I would say that the accounting profession has long been dedicated to enhancing investor confidence and trust in global capital markets. And this responsibility, quite naturally, in my opinion, and hopefully those of my colleagues, has extended quite naturally to the provision of high quality sustainability information as we move forward. And as was noted, I'm very proud that Canada is hosting the second center of the ISSB, recently established in Montreal and inaugurated just a couple of months ago. Second, I'd like to note that auditing and assurance is really only one aspect of what the accounting profession will bring to the table when it comes to producing high quality sustainability reporting. And I speak both as a former CFO of an insurance company, as well as in my current role with CPA Canada. So professional accountants will be tasked with implementing all of these standards, just like Madam Kreis alluded to earlier, and developing the systems, the processes, and the controls over the data and the reporting is going to be a huge undertaking, and ensuring that there is consistency between the financial and sustainability reporting aspects are very important. Auditors will have to give an opinion as well on whether the company has correctly applied the standards. This is why, as a profession, we are so heavily invested in supporting the ISSB right from the beginning and contributing to the development of high quality standards that are practical, operational, and then enforceable for the financial markets. But absolutely, as you note, there are a number of challenges that are faced currently. And the recent ISSB consultation the responses included many of those challenges. So the nature of the data and information is really diverse and subject to varying degrees of measurement and estimation uncertainty. Another note is that some of the data, as Madame Kreis earlier noted, is really hard to capture if it resides within the supply or distribution chains that aren't within the organization's control directly. And it's challenging to determine whether all elements of the value chain are then being identified and accounted for. A third note I would make is that measurement methodologies in certain areas, especially scope 3, which I believe has already been raised today, are not well developed at this point, especially for the SME market. So that impairs consistency, comparability, and reliability of that information, which are all desirable traits of this information. It also includes a heavy emphasis, which is a little new for the assurance sector, on future-oriented financial information, such as the scenario analysis that was originally contemplated within the TCFD, and then the future impacts of climate change on the business model, on strategy, and financial performance. This information is very subjective and speculative. And finally, I would say that the burden of these requirements on smaller organizations, Madame Kreis mentioned, and she is part of a very large, well-known, well-established institution with many resources, and it is a strain on her resources in her organization. But smaller organizations are really, really important in order to ensure that the burden isn't such that they exit the capital markets altogether. I think, as you well articulated in your earlier points, it's not about who can produce the most beautiful financial reports. It's about the business that drives then appropriate reporting from which the capital markets and others can compare organizational performance and long-term value creation one to another.
Well, thank you. You already gave us a long list of things that have to be managed on the way towards the objective of achieving high-quality data. A small follow-up would be, can accountants do that on themselves, or do they need a larger process of interdisciplinary cooperation with technical experts for ESG, if you like? And if you think of the range of highly important topics, from emissions to biodiversity, from value chains to a governance issue, I can imagine that it will be both interesting and challenging to relate to professional bodies who have deeper expertise in figuring out the substance and the materiality of these things. How do you consider the international process of bringing these expert communities together so that in the end the accounting and auditing profession can indeed rely on the best available quality?
I think it's an excellent point, and I would point out that the accounting profession and auditing profession has a long and well understood history and practice of knowing when to rely on expertise and how to procure that expertise on which they must rely. Even within our panel, there would be insurance represented. Will they rely on actuarial estimates in order to provide and oversee the assurance over their financial disclosures already? And if one thinks about the mining or the oil and gas fields, we already have a great protocol in place for relying on engineers, scientists, and others with respect to remediation of sites or assessing reserve capacity for the future reserves of an organization. So I think that it is indeed extremely important. I would say potentially more broadly important as we move into sustainability reporting and assurance over that reporting. And as we like to say, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it will take a global village, of which we are all a part, in order to make this new sustainability framework, reporting, and assurance over disclosures work well and efficiently for both financial markets and for others.
Thank you. we will dig into that topic later on a bit deeper. I would like to turn to Mr. Borjan. Now, interestingly, you are the Chief Financial Officer of a financial firm. And even though you're also a large investor, obviously, in equity and bonds, I would like to ask you more a question on how a financial firm moves in that sustainability field. Often from the real world, financial institutions are of course perceived as the demandeurs in this debate. Those who want to have all these data, they need them on sustainability to make wise decisions on investment and asset allocation. But of course you are yourself subject to the constraints of the capital markets and the requirements for information on your own sustainability profile. How do you cope with that? And what are the key challenges for a large institutional investor such as your company in that regard, Mr. Borjan?
Yes, first of all, good morning for the Americas, good afternoon for Europe, and good evening if anyone from Asia is connected. Thanks for this invitation. It's a huge opportunity to share very important topics today. So let me try to start from the point that we do cope with a lot of complexity as well. We are a global group, and we suffer from the dispersion and entropy related to this sustainability reporting evolution. It is a normal process, as Mr. Malone before described. We need to go step by step, and we need to funnel it through different steps, like we did for the accounting international standard, but it is creating some point. Let me say that we clearly wish some use of the closest global baseline possible, because I think three words are key in this reasoning: engagement, alignment, and integration. And I explain you why. We need to have everybody engaged in something which is very simple. We spoke a lot about measuring things, and where we are chief financial officer and general finance people, knowing that value has to be measured, but it is according to some rules. When I was a younger kid, I was a physicist, and temperature, amount of rain, amount of wind is undoubtable. The effect of these actions is very measurable, unfortunately. The value we are pouring it or destroying it is more as a definition. The real point that as an industry, speaking from insurance, we are the first interested in supporting this transition, because we are suffering from natural catastrophes and all the things which are related to high impact to small, medium enterprises in case they are not ready for this. So for sure, we are an industry where there is the full alignment between, as a corporate sustainability in the longer term of the existence and the profit of the company, and together the benefit of the society. Having said that, the alignment is important also for the companies in order to report, because the cost is quite extensive, and as we understood before by larger companies like Deutsche Post, yes, we do have a specific reporting unit as well, but not all the companies can bear this cost. And in the supplier, I will need those information, even if you are a small, medium enterprise. So we need to think how to go in as close as possible, step-by-step coherence, in order to avoid spilling over cost on the full supply chain, on the full value chain of our industries. And this is key, because it's not anymore like investment or accounting decision only on what is value. It is really impacting the full industry per se. And speaking in the part of, as I was saying, a big investor generally has almost 650 billion euro of assets that are under management. We are massively impacted and interested in making the right decision. Our investor base as shareholders is not all in Europe. It is a large part, almost half, outside Europe. So we need to have standards also for those investors to allocate the capital, and they would like to decide who is doing well or bad and decide whether to step in or step out on companies. Just to clarify one point more, the professional and the accountants will be impacted as well, as Pamela said before, because clearly it is going to be a new revolution. As an insurance industry, we are just exiting, we are in the last 3 months of the largest transformation of the accounting standards because of the liability accounting of the insurance contracts is a massive change for the industry, and it will go into life January 1st, 2023. But after that, we will have this revolution of sustainability reporting, will not only impact the insurance industry, but everybody, and it will be, again, massive. As a company, how do we cope with this? Is that we are pouring the approach of finance reporting and financial reporting into the gathering of assets, because when we present those numbers, the largest risk we can have, and here we are very cautious, all the industry, especially in insurance, I see everybody's taking cautiousness, not to overstate your positive effect, because there is a huge backfire if you are not able to have a solid and decisive measurement around this. So there is a lot of prudence in the way we assess. When something is in the gray area, always is decided to stay on the safe side of what is the impact. So you overstate the negative impact and you understate the positive one in order to avoid this kind of thing. So far, it is a factual point, unless we will get to a more standardized approach. As an investor, we have, for example, the issue of the time delay. When a company decides to change materially something, we have to wait their corporate reporting the year after to account for it into our investment while things are happening. So there is also this kind of delay effect. It is a never-ending journey. As a way to explain, for sure, as a financial institution, we apply the so-called integrated thinking approach, where we do speak about the financial, but what we call sustainability reporting, I'm internally explaining to the board as a pre-financial. We do think really that those numbers are pre-financially preparing what the behavior of the company will be in the future because of the full impact we have and the way, because these are not only sustainability in the sense of the environment, but it is also in the sense of our people and our customer. So for sure, the panorama is quite complex, and the only solution is to have a phased-in approach, knowing that the cost of complexity will be borne by smaller companies and not only by the largest one, which are able to cope with this, but the smaller one. And we need to have the economy running. But at the same time, I go back to the key message is we need to be able to orient the decision on something which is very measurable, which is the negative impact of this, especially in the climate change and on the biodiversity effect of human into our planet Earth.
Thank you for this first introduction into the world of insurance. Maybe one additional element I would like to ask you is, of course, you're mostly judged as an institutional investor plus a life insurance company. How do these interactions with the investor community that looks at your company really work out? Because second guessing your own sustainability approach to your asset allocation for outsiders is sort of a difficult exercise given the range of data that is available right now. How do you cope with that?
Yes, we have, I think, 3 areas to highlight. The first and foremost important one is, as an institutional investor, we can orient huge amount of asset into that. And this is why we are looking into our portfolio. Generali is one of the 10th largest real estate portfolio in the world. You can imagine on our building, what can we do to decrease the impact? All new buildings are made sustainable, but we have also to work on the backlog on the old ones, for example. So step 1 is act through the responsible investment and focus more and more in steering towards this kind of asset in the asset allocation. This is part. So we are an asset allocator as well. On the other part, we are also an insurance company, and so we are selling products to clients. And in choosing which clients we want to work with, when clients are starting journey to improve the sustainability of their business, hence reducing the carbon footprint impact, for example, we are helping them, but we are making a pact. We are following a project of reduction of impact, and if this is not followed, we do not feel the pact is anymore there. So we dismiss the coverage, because we need also, as an insurer, to foster, accelerate the transition in some very carbon intensive business. The third part we are looking at is the way we are looked at ourselves as an investor, investing in general. The way they are looking at us being an insurer is exactly on the sustainability as a core business, and it is exactly at the core of our latest 2022-2024 strategy, even though it was well behind us in the previous cycle, but the last cycle has been built around this, and we are strongly focused around this. Just for an example, in the last 4 years, we were the first European insurer to issue a subordinated green bond. We were the first one to issue a sustainability bond. We created the concept of green insurance linked security, which is the cat bond. Basically, we instead of going to our insurer, we go to the market, ask them to help us reinsuring catastrophic risk. And those proceeds are then invested in infrastructure green product with the Bank for World Development. So for sure, this kind of support is very well appreciated. And I have to tell you, specific investor and more the largest institutional investor are not even considering companies which do not follow a sustainability journey. And this was very clear in every meeting I have with the investor. So we have also all the elements and the alignment of interest to go in this direction.
Well, thank you for this very lively explanation what it does mean in practical terms. Let's move to our fifth panelist, Mr. Stewart. Good morning to New York. Happy to have you with us. Your previous organization, and you as well, have been those who ventured first into the discussion, what does it mean for specific branches and sectors, and how do we get about measuring, reporting, sustainability at a more specific level. And I would like to ask you to share a bit of that experience with us, how to go about specifying things in more detail and setting and developing standards for various industries, not only in manufacturing, but across the whole economy. Good. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Klaus, and thank you very much for the invitation and the chance to be part of this very important event, and the chance to build on the remarks of my new colleague, Emmanuel Faber, the chair of the ISSB. As you alluded to, Klaus, my previous organization, ISSB, which and the Value Reporting Foundation, have completed our consolidation into the IFRS Foundation at the beginning of this month. So now bringing the ISSB standards, the integrated reporting framework, into the IFRS Foundation to support the new ISSB and developing this comprehensive global baseline of sustainability disclosures for the capital markets connected to the financial statements. And this consolidation really answers market demand, including from companies, from investors, from regulators, for simplification of the sustainability disclosure landscape. The ISSB standards are a key starting point for the development of the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards under the ISSB. And as was discussed in the previous panel as well, the integrated reporting framework provides the connectivity between the IASB and ISSB, and indeed between the financial statements and sustainability-related financial disclosures. So the ISSB is actually encouraging the continued use of both ISSB standards and integrated reporting framework as we move towards this global baseline. Now, for people who may not be familiar with the SASB standards, let me give you a little bit of background. They were created more than a decade ago to really answer the need of investors then, as investors right across asset classes, across different styles of investment, including mainstream investment, began integrating ESG factors, recognizing sustainability risk as business risk. They lacked the data to be able to compare company to company, to make their investment decisions, to make their voting decisions. That was where the SASB standards came in. I was delighted with the way Melanie from Deutsche Post DHL began our session, reminding us that reporting is not an end in itself, but that it is an enabler, a way to focus on the most important topics first. That's exactly the principle that SASB was founded on. Indeed, SASB grew out of research at Harvard, co-authored by our founder, Dr. Gene Rogers, entitled From Transparency to Performance, moving from reporting to actually improving the underlying ESG performance on the factors that actually were relevant to a company's business model, and ultimately to improve financial performance. And since that founding more than a decade ago, the SASB standards, this group of industry-based standards for companies to use, have grown in use around the world. We're now at around 2,500 SASB reporters worldwide. Just over 50% of them are outside the US. So really, really global use. Now, coming back to the ISSB, as can already be seen in the exposure drafts that we issued at the end of Q1 this year, with a comment period that just closed at the end of July, the ISSB is embedding an industry-based approach in its standard setting, and as a priority addressing the international applicability of the SASB standards. Now, why is this? Because sustainability issues that are relevant to enterprise value vary by industry. And both investors and companies need comparable, consistent, reliable information to benchmark sustainability performance. So both companies in benchmarking and investors in making their investment decisions, guiding the flow of capital, need these consistent standards. So I'll give you an example: diversity and inclusion. It means different things for, say, a retailer seeking to serve a diverse customer base versus a software company that needs to attract and retain high quality talent, or versus an asset manager that's seeking to reduce risk with better decision making. Or consider again the industry differences in even climate change and climate risk. It means very different things to a real estate company or an insurance company facing acute physical events like floods and wildfires versus, say, a car company in the shift to electric vehicles. So the result of this industry-based approach is a focused set of disclosures for each industry. In the case of the SASB standards, it's an average of just 6 topics and 13 metrics. This reduces the complexity and the burden of preparers because all the relevant topics are identified. It's cost-effective to gather data, analyze it, verify it, report it. It surfaces the most important information for investors, reducing the work for them as well. So this really comes back to some of the themes that we've been talking about throughout the whole conference today: reducing the burden on preparers, increasing the decision usefulness of information for investors. And so you start to see how the industry-based approach comes into this. So we really are starting to answer the question that is posed in the title of this panel: how companies will benefit from the use of a global baseline. And so to more directly answer that, let me finish these remarks with the 5 ways companies benefit, really the 5 reasons companies and investors are engaging with and supporting the ISSB. So number 1, we're continuing the use of existing frameworks and standards. Investors and companies have coalesced around the cross-industry approach of the TCFD recommendations and the industry-based approach of the SASB standards, and we're building those into the new ISSB standards. Number 2, investor demand. Global investors value this approach, the cross-industry with the industry-specific approach. They expect companies to continue using SASB standards and prepare for the ISSB standards. Third, we're simplifying the ESG landscape, essentially consolidating 5 standards and frameworks into one. And fourth is around harmonization. The ISSB is the path to create this global baseline focused on enterprise value, so harmonizing and aligning different jurisdictions. And finally, investors value industry-based disclosure standards because they're relevant to a company's business model. They improve comparability of data across companies and markets and help reduce the reporting burden to companies. So again, to really sum up the 2 key things, an industry-based approach minimizes the burden for preparers and maximizes the usefulness of information for investors.
Well, if I may ask you a follow-up that relates more to the emerging practice in capital markets of demanding from many companies, in particular in energy-intensive industries, transition pathways or sectoral performance plans, maybe until 2050, how to get to zero. Now, my non-expert judgment on this process is that it's not well developed yet. It lacks coherence. It's like spontaneous interaction between a few players in the market. Could those processes you work on provide sort of the underground, the necessary reporting and data framework to make that intelligible, or do you see different elements that are necessary on top of that?
I think it's a really great question, an interesting question. And I think what we saw coming out of COP26 in November, it was called the business COP. We had never seen so much representation of business and the advisors to business, such as the accounting profession, at the UN climate conference. What we saw was the clear shift from goals to action, from naming a net zero target some years into the future to answering the question, well, how are we going to get there? And what are the interim targets? And what is our progress along the way? And this is where standards, again, come in and are so important. And also industry-based standards. So the question is, are you getting to net zero because you're designing better products and improving the energy efficiency downstream? Are you getting there by reducing your consumption of energy, scope 2 emissions? Are you getting there by reducing your own emissions, scope 1? Is it a matter of managing your supply chain better, or is it a matter of managing your customers better, in effect? I think that's where standards become so important, is really, in a way, putting the meat on the bones of net zero targets. And not just having it be a target at some date out in the future, but actually being able to identify, well, from industry to industry, what are the pathways to both mitigate and adapt to climate change.
Well, thank you. That leads me to a question to Ms. Kreis. In Europe, of course, we have now a few years of experience of developing technical standards for a variety of economic activities called the EU taxonomy, which tries to bridge the gap between complexity and simplicity by defining normally out of EU law certain parameters for industries. And we are in the process in which the European standard setter EFRAG is working on very specific standards also for a broad range of industries with different definitions of what is the sort of material impact of a company on various ESG performance criteria. What's your shorthand experience with the taxonomy so far and with the challenges of reporting along that? And what's your desire for the EFRAG process? And if you would have a free wish for today, what should they deliver to balance the complexity of what we want to know with the simplicity requirements that might even allow SMEs to stay in capital markets and not quit them?
Yeah, great question. And maybe I start with the wish. I think the wish is very simple. Less is more. Because I think what the EU taxonomy shows very clearly that quite often with the best intentions, a very simple idea turns into a very complex and burdensome bureaucratic act. So I think the basic idea of the EU taxonomy I really liked. Percentage of green revenue, percentage of green OPEX, percentage of green CapEx. Sounds super simple. But then the problem starts. The way it is set up by activities is something which already goes, at least in the case of our company, but also when I talk to many other companies, against the segmentation we are used from our financial reporting. So you already have a complexity because you have to kind of like work with the activity definition. You have to somehow map that to your group structure and your financial reporting. Complexity number one. If you then manage to do that and you kind of like across all the different activities, you already end up with a wide portfolio of KPIs. You then have the additional complexity of the do not significantly harm criteria on top, which again, with the best of intentions, because we want to accomplish everything and at the same time, were put on top. That then leads to a situation where the complexity increases, but it also then leads to a position, for example, in our case, where actually doing the right thing is not recognized by the EU taxonomy anymore. So give you a concrete example, we have significant last mile delivery operations, and we were early movers on decarbonizing our last mile. We have the largest fleet of electric delivery vehicles out there. More than 20,000 electric delivery vans are out there every day. But under the EU taxonomy, they would not count because of the do not significantly harm site criteria and the noise profile of the tires, which is, of course, completely absurd that under the first version, a diesel vehicle, 20 years old, would get the same credit as an electric delivery vehicle because of the noise profile of the tires. And that is clearly not the intention, but it shows that if you try to overburden something with too many interests, it does actually in the end defeat the purpose. So I think as hard as that is, because we all feel the sense of urgency to get moving and to do something, and there are very well justified interests from biodiversity to water protection, we won't solve everything at the same time. We will have to prioritize to make sure that we get sufficient traction. And I think that is now the difficult also political alignment process on where do we put the priorities, because there's no magic wand and we can't fix everything at the same time. So it's always easy to create complexity. It's much, much harder to reduce complexity because then you have to deprioritize certain things. But if we really want to see impact, if we want to have industry, and I totally agree that we need industry-specific approaches. If you want industries to focus on the right stuff, not for the period out to 2050, but in the next years, in the current decade, we will have to prioritize. That is why my simple wish is less is more. Focus on a few KPIs, on a few recording requirements, make sure that there we really have very clear definitions so that there is no greenwashing and no nice marketing reporting anymore, but in those chosen and prioritized categories, there are crystal clear definitions so that we can compare apples with apples, and then we will see which companies are really making progress and which are just out there with marketing brochures.
Right, follow-up question to Mr. Maloney and to Niels Stewart. How do you judge the stepwise process of prioritizing standard setting in practice? Since you are both involved in the institutions doing that, is there sort of an implicit or explicit agenda for, starting with E and maybe climate and then maybe with biodiversity? Or do you think that E, S and G have to be developed at the same time, but maybe then there's a phase-in approach in terms of timing at which particular year reporting has to begin? How do we cope with that? Mr. Maloney, maybe first.
Let me say firstly, from a global point of view, the agenda to which the European Union has committed itself, which is an E, an S, and a G agenda in all its complexity, is not one in which there is a global agreement. And it's not one that has the imprimatur of the United Nations, let's say, framework and targets at the moment. There is a clear priority, which you see reflected in talking to governments and regulators around the world for carbon as a key priority issue that has to be dealt with, and net zero as an urgent and important target. I welcome the fact that the ISSB has actually opened up a debate on where it should go after that, if I can put it that way, and the fact that it has structured its framework so that it makes clear the framework up front. It takes carbon as the first topic it tackles, and it has announced it intends to go on and look at other topics thereafter. I think it would be very important for the ISSB to listen carefully to jurisdictions around the world and see where you can get the greatest degree of consensus around the world as you move out into other areas. Areas, for example, like biodiversity, are extremely challenging. They're extremely challenging because a lot of the data analysis you want to look at is situational, as distinct from carbon, where it's not. You're talking about a global emissions situation. But when it comes to biodiversity, you're talking about a place. And what is the biodiversity characteristics of that place? Are they getting worse or better? So as difficult as it is to deal with carbon, it gets even more difficult when you get onto some of these other issues that we have to deal with. And as it gets more difficult, global consensus gets harder to achieve. So you need to proceed in very transparent and well rationalized steps as you move from topic to topic. You should not, being totally frank here, you should not progress on the basis of what's the most desirable or interesting area to get stuck into. You have to focus on where you can get consensus, and particularly where you can get a political consensus to make progress. However, looking at the progressive agenda in terms of the E, the S, and the G is only one way of looking at it. We in IOSCO have published a sustainable finance work plan, which looks at it in a different way, which is, how do we look progressively at the issue of carbon? Because that isn't an issue that is all to be dealt with in one go. So we've talked about working with the ISSB first on its standards, then working with the audit and assurance industry more generally on developing assurance standards, a necessary concomitant and very definitely non-trivial step that has to come after that. And then looking after that, and we've started to look at this, at voluntary carbon markets and the whole really controversial issue of whether you can get a market in place that will price voluntary credits, but price them on the basis of a global level of assurance as to the quality of those credits, because there are huge issues at the moment around the quality of those credits, whether it's avoidance or capture or whatever the other aspects of that is. Now, those are three targets we have set ourselves, and backing up those targets, we're also working separately on trying to create a culture within capital markets and in the asset management sector that finds greenwashing in all its forms unacceptable. Because at the moment, to be frank, there isn't that cultural resistance to that. There's a lot of excellent asset managers out there doing a lot of really good work, but at an industry level, it just hasn't quite reached the cultural level of opprobrium towards greenwashing that we would love to see in this industry. So there are all sorts of steps that need to be taken, not just to get from E to S to G, but really to build out the ecosystem for carbon. And that's really quite a difficult, challenging. Net zero is a hugely challenging issue of itself. That said, Europe has gone in an integrated way to try to take on the whole agenda in one single integrated framework, and has done so for reasons I think that make completely sense from a European perspective. And everything we do at a global level to create pathways globally needs also to work to allow Europe to do what Europe wishes to do and to pursue this the way it wishes to do. And I'm quite sure in a European context, they will be successful at that, doing it in a somewhat different way from other parts of the world. But that's part of the challenge that we face, I think, in trying to get all the different ways there are to look at this to plug in together.
Thank you. That makes, of course, a lot of sense. Nils Stewart, you want to comment on that broader issue as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Martin put it very, very well and summed up the whole ecosystem there. So, and IOSCO is supporting the development of standards, the assurance of disclosure, and then the infrastructure, the carbon markets that also have to be built up in this ecosystem. I'll just point out that that the mandate or the mission that was given to the IFRS Foundation through public consultation and through the oversight of IOSCO was clearly to tackle climate first as the most urgent and pressing problem facing the world, but not climate only. And even from day one, and in fact, the General Disclosure Requirements Exposure Draft, S1, is an overarching document that requires companies to report on all significant sustainability-related risks and opportunities, whatever they might be. So under the S and the G, beyond environment. And then further to Martin's point as well is thinking ahead, well, what's next in terms of specific reporting requirements, as we've done with climate, that agenda will also be very much informed by market needs, by the input of various advisory groups, and by the dialogue that we have with other standard setters and frameworks. So TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosure, is very important, growing new organization. We will be working closely with them. The ISSB will also be participating in the Biodiversity COP in Montreal in December, and we see that as an extremely important event, and really aligns very well in terms of our Montreal base and as well as our focus going forward.
Well, that's a perfect bridge, because I wanted to ask anyhow Ms. Steele on the topic how she judges the discussion among corporates in Canada, in particular those that are not maybe the largest companies, on how to go about reporting on sustainability issues. And maybe with a particular angle. You all know there's a very strong interest of many G7 partners of Canada into Canadian capacities in energy and new forms of energy and so on. And of course, the way Canada handles sort of the trade-off of supplying energy to the world of various sources and mitigating the footprint is of particular relevance. And since you are so exposed to the North American market in general, it's also interesting how to square the issue of competitiveness with that. And I think we could benefit from you, from a few insights, how the discussion in Canada moves on that.
Someone had to forget the mute button today. Thank you for that. And there are a number of aspects that you just mentioned. First of all, Canada is dominated by its small and medium-sized enterprise market. And I believe we had an earlier discussion, certainly earlier in the first panel, as well as in this panel, about the importance of making it simple, having access to data, and not overburdening small and medium-sized players and issuers with requirements from the beginning. These organizations have much fewer resources at their disposal. They're much more concerned about, not that they're not concerned about issues of ESG, they believe it's very important, but they want the market, they need those larger firms to lead the way, to help provide and facilitate the ecosystem, as Mr. Maloney just alluded to, as well as Mr. Stewart. They need that ecosystem around them that provides them with easy to understand, easily accessible data that is reliable, from which they can have templates or other useful tools in order to make reporting on matters of ESG as simple and as low cost as possible. Otherwise, we really risk the exit, or at least not even the entrance of players, issuers into the capital markets, which I think would be a loss for public markets and global liquidity. So that's one piece with respect to small and medium-sized enterprises. On the energy side, of course, Canada has a very resource-rich country with a very relatively small population, and ESG matters are very important to the energy sector. And in fact, what we call the oil sands, the bituminous energy producers, are high emitters, and they're also among those who spend the most money in order to decarbonize as quickly as possible. And I honestly don't know of another industry where the CEOs of the largest of those companies get together weekly in the development of a large-scale carbon capture and use facility that they all will take part in. And that's my understanding, is all 6 of them get together regularly, weekly, in fact. So it's really important, and especially with the current political and environment, as was noted at the outset with our host's remarks, energy security, as well as operating as an energy producer in an economy and an environment that is well known for excellence in governance, excellence in democratic values and pragmatic approaches, as well as, I would say, a leading position with respect to sustainability, is a really important factor when you consider the energy industry within Canada and the desire to do the right thing and to decarbonize as quickly as possible as we transition. And the discussion earlier focused on the taxonomy within Europe, which is a green taxonomy, and Canada and other jurisdictions, notably those who do have a more broad resource base, are currently working on a transition taxonomy as well, because while green is exceptionally important and we want to prevent greenwashing everywhere, it's also important, perhaps even more important, I would contend, that we focus on those industries that are high emitters, because by decarbonizing them, we will have the largest impact. And really, at the end of the day, isn't that the ultimate goal of what we're all trying to achieve here, and why we're all participating and such passionate advocates for the topic of the day? So I think that Canada plays, in some respects, a unique, and certainly I would like to say a leading role in how we work through aspects of transition in the effort that everyone is involved in to attain net zero on not just a national basis, but to contribute globally to that effort as well.
Well, thank you for that point. I think this leads me directly to our Italian colleague. If you look at the discussion in Europe, there's sometimes a bit of a tension because of Germany and Italy are the 2 leading industrial economies in Europe by sheer measurement of output, very simple. And of course, we have a large number of branches that are still high emitters or very energy intensive, chemicals, of course, cars partly, steel, glass, ceramics, you name it. And all of them are developing decarbonization strategies. Some of them are stock market listed, most of them are not, but they all face the same sort of demand from society to decarbonize as fast as possible. Now, there are 2 complexities with that. One is public policy, because most of those transition technologies require, intermediate steps or new technologies, large investments to new capital facilities, new infrastructures, and so on. Many of which are dependent on either public infrastructure investments or public policy frameworks supporting the transition. That's the one complexity. We don't deal with that because we don't have politicians on the panel today. The other is the complexity that capital markets as investors, and increasingly banks as lenders are by themselves required to look at the sustainability issue of these energy-intensive industries, and not only the power sector, but also the energy-intensive users. And the complexity is, of course, that sometimes the perceptual debate moves into the direction that financial markets are sort of ahead of industrial transformation and/or of policy, right? With the argument saying, well, we know technologies that would work, we know the way to get there, the policy framework is not there, but capital markets are punishing, excluding, or investing into certain types of activities with a view towards a very fast transition pathway that might be feasible or not. Now, I think many companies had made up their mind before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and on the basis of known prices for gas, oil, and H2. Now, that's of course not the relevant price parameter of today, but again, the topic is not different. The policy framework is even more challenging, and the capital market judgment is even more difficult. How do you go about, as an insurance company, both on the investor side as well as on the casualty and true insurance policy underwriting business on fixing or on squaring the circle on how to cope with these industries and companies?
Yes, this is a key element, because let me clarify, at least insurance is not a carbon intensive business because of the way we operate. It is more the way we invest into and our carbon footprint could be seen through the investment portfolio, so the money we supply to the companies. But in doing this, it is not that we should not be part of this. We have a huge opportunity. I was telling you before, we were almost 650 billion of asset under management. And we are in discussion, for example, with the European Commission, which is setting the standards for the solvency of companies, to try to allow on this kind of green investment and in general infrastructure project, which could foster the acceleration towards the transition. Because at the end of the game, nothing comes without investment. We have a huge pot. So we would be seen as an enabler in providing a kind of exchange. Now you can understand that if you treat such investment like an investment in a very risky company, is different than if you treat this like a similar investment in a government which is doing that. We should also distinguish between government which are well ahead, in line, or behind the transition path. And in this discussion, we are trying to push the companies to accelerate. As an insurer, as I was telling before, we started and we had a long-term journey on our insured clients on how they are going to make a transition. I have two simple examples. Carbon-intensive business in Central Eastern Europe. Yes, we were insurer of some state-owned mines and for carbon mines, and we agreed with them a transition project. Some countries followed it, some others, and which were state-owned, did not. But we, in that case, did not renew the insurance coverage for the year after, because we took a stance around this. It is a small part of the business, but it is a way also to foster it, because you know insurance is quite important, not only the investment side, but the coverage of risk. For someone not being able to be covered in his business is becoming more and more compelling to accelerate. So we try to accelerate the transition from these two sides, not insuring or sharing a journey towards transition, and as well investing in this kind of project. On the other side, we are fostering small and medium enterprises. For example, together with the support of the European Commission in presenting it in Brussels yearly, we support the best project in small and medium enterprises which are insured by Generali. And Generali has a large portfolio. As you said before, Italy and Germany has a very big industrial and in general productive area, and we are key for sure in Italy and number two in Germany player on this small medium enterprise. And we are helping these companies in doing their transition, even in the way they have to insure themselves. I take an example. This is on France. Companies which were following the risk assessment of what should be covered in the insurance and were following our, let's say, risk engineer, which were evaluating the risk before underwriting the policy, were less in danger of having claims or accidents compared to companies which were not following those indications, which is also a way to move insurance from payer to prevention, because this is also our intention to work in a better way with the client. So we are working on two sides. Asset and liability, which I mean investment and products, coverages on clients and big corporations. And on small, medium enterprises, especially, we are helping them to foster the transition and following the indication on the risk engineer on how to better cope with their business and being less risky. So this is the way we are working. It is a global trend. Mainly, clearly, Generali is mainly European from a P&L. More than 85% of our P&L comes from Europe, and so clearly it is. We are focused more there, but all the companies are moving into this direction. And I have to be very clear: investors are ruthless around this. Ruthless. Each time we have to report, and when we have the AGM, we have our shareholders asking ourselves to the company, have you quit? Did you quit? How is going with the company which you made the project of transition? Are they following? Yes, no. How many companies did you quit? What is the amount of premium you are underwriting in carbon intensive business which are not transitioning? So these kind of questions are daily questions in meeting with investors and a regular question in the general shareholder meeting. And this is another way to force people to act. Generali is one of the first subscribers to the Net Zero Alliance, also Net Zero Insurance Alliance, and we are fostering this in all possible ways. One of the examples is that we are setting up the Center for Sustainability, also supporting Italian projects in Venice, which is the city by definition under threat by sustainability and climate, because could not exist in case of increase of the level of the sea. So for sure, this makes a lot of sense, and we're trying to put all in this direction. And I think the asset side, especially more than the insurer side, which helps as well, but the asset side is a massive, because we can fund really the economy. We can really fund the economy, provided that we find the right capital charge on those investments. The amount of money we have to put aside as an investor to maintain solvency. If the European Commission goes in the right direction, we could really free up a huge transition. As an insurance business, we have trillions of assets, only European, to be invested, which is quite a large one. For example, Generali committed only in the Italian landscape to support also only for Italy. We have a broader commitment, but only for Italy to 3.5 billion in a project called Phoenix 190, which last year was 190 years of Generali. The Phoenix is one of the symbols of Venice because there is the theater. So we wanted to support in this way, and we have the balance sheet to do it. So it's really a matter of allowing the companies to do it, no, and not constrain them only to buy government bonds. So this is the discussion with the European Commission, especially.
Well, grazie, perfetto. Well, I would have a final question to all of you. We haven't heard yet an argument why companies may not be able to obtain a loan, issue a bond, or issue equity going forward. I think it will become more complex, partly more difficult for the best achievers, maybe even more affordable, for the laggards more expensive. But if you reflect for 1 minute, what would be the sort of key benefit or key upside to the current discussion you might see within the next 2 years to be surprised on the positive? And what is sort of the key concern we maybe haven't talked about in terms of a risk that things might go wrong? We start with Ms. Kreis, who started the discussion for the final round as well.
Yeah, so I'll be brief in the interest of time. So I think, as I said, the big push would be less is more, but I think we will have to work with competing standards and different standards in the foreseeable future. I think what is then super important is that those key areas, particularly around carbon emissions, which are covered by different standards, that at least in those areas we get an alignment on terminology and on disclosure requirements. So there will be overlapping standards, and I think companies like us will probably have to report different things in different formats. If we could at least agree on the terminology and for the key KPIs, get alignment on calculation methods, so that if we report the same thing in different standards, we at least report in the same definition and it doesn't get confusing there. I think that would be complexity on top of complexity if under different standards the same thing is calculated in a different way and we have the same word with different meanings. So that would be my minimum wish. If we don't get the big unified theory, I'm also a physicist. I always dream of a great unified theory. If I can't get that, I at least want to have in the overlap areas clear definitions.
Thank you for this stance of German pragmatism. Ms. Stier.
Thank you. I think the biggest risk that I see facing global economies is, and I'm not entering into a political discussion, but regulatory and political uncertainty in the markets will be devastating to those capital market participants who wish to avail themselves of programs or better understand disclosure requirements, and significant changes in one direction or another create uncertainty, and uncertainty creates indecision and inaction in some cases. And so I think the biggest risk faced by the panelists here, certainly, and then by economies, is the regulatory and political uncertainty that will slow down the action that is so urgently required, which has necessitated this reporting, etc. The opportunities, though, I think do outweigh the risks, and I'm very excited to see the tipping point that I believe we have reached now with respect to sustainability direction, not just reporting and disclosure, which is important, obviously, but it's the direction of many of our corporates and many political bodies, as well as regulators, that are all moving in the same direction. And, you know, it's taken many decades for financial reporting and accounting, the ecosystem, to build itself. And I believe that the ecosystem surrounding sustainability frameworks and reporting and action and movement actually will move much more quickly as the world coalesces towards some, if not the grand unified theory, at least some uniformity and some baseline, which I'm very excited about. So those would be, I think, the biggest risks and the biggest opportunities, in my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Maloney, can you cope with this speed that's required of you?
Actually, the speed, you know, it's one of the things I won't say comfortable with, but I'm a little bit proud of the speed at which the system has moved, because it has had, particularly in the last year, a sense of urgency that is absolutely. I think if you can still hear me, sorry, have you lost contact with me, or can you still hear me? Yes, you can. Okay, so I think listening to this conversation, one of the worries I would have is if you were let's say a family-owned company that never goes near capital markets, you might think this a conversation was a bit academic from your point of view, let's say a private company. I think what will happen that might surprise you is as you go to your bank looking for facilities, you will find that your banks are being asked for transition plans from their regulators that will require your bank to seek and press you to provide them with scope 1, 2, and possibly 3 emissions and various other disclosures in order for them to populate their transition plans. And some companies that don't go anywhere near capital markets might find themselves unhappily surprised by the need to move quickly, as we regulators are trying to move quickly to fill those gaps. And therefore, I think all companies have a crucially legitimate demand, and I think it came out a little bit in your earlier session, that they should make of us regulators. And that's maybe something we're not necessarily good at, which is to use our imagination. And to use our imagination to do everything possible, not only to get common definitions, but to do everything we can to try to get as much overlap and consistency of process for corporates in compliance with these standards as we can get. So there are a couple of key dates coming up. EFRAG will publish guidance for in Europe in relation to the European requirements, and the ISSB will publish its finalized standards, and we in IOSCO will go through a process of review of the ISSB standards to work out if they're fit for capital markets. It is a legitimate question for all corporates to ask us is, have you really done everything you can in order to get us as close to a single due diligence process around our reporting requirements as we possibly can get to? And I would say press us hard on that matter over the next few months.
Rest be assured. Niels Stewart, final comment from you.
Well, Emmanuel Faber wrote a piece in the FT last week, and he pointed out that capital markets can move trillions if properly guided and informed. And we need those trillions to solve huge problems in this world. But capital markets can only play that role with high quality, comparable sustainability information to make investment decisions. And also think back to what Mr. Strasser said, Mr. Strasser from the Ministry of Justice said at the beginning of this conference, that sustainability reporting can help companies identify their own risks and opportunities, increase understanding of those risks and opportunities. And I would extend that to increase performance around those ESG factors. So to me, the biggest risk is that we get bogged down in a tick the box compliance exercise instead of really a meaningful communication between companies and investors. That's what we're aiming for. Let's not get caught up in the complexity and make this merely a costly compliance exercise.
Mr. Borian, can you live up to that expectation?
Yes, allow me to say that I do not want to repeat all the brilliant colleagues before said and panelists. So basically, I see for sure the huge willingness of the whole industry and the financial market to move in that direction. Neil was very clear in in showing the risk if it is not followed, because the market want to move the money. The largest risk I can see on top of what has been said is relating to the fact that we should not have anyone hiding behind politics or geopolitical issues to either slow down or try to change this, because the moment is really now. We cannot wait, and the money are really there. It is not that we don't want to invest. The investors just want to have something clear. If you don't have a standard or at least a comparable and understandable direction on where to go, it is difficult to pour the money in. And please don't hide behind. The transition can be done. We do not need to go back to coal simply because the cost of energy is on top. We have money to be put in the economy to help the transition and to accelerate it. So the risk is not to hide behind the politics and do our job. At the end, the transition would come from the people and from the market.
Well, thank you to all of you for this very rich and insightful discussion. Thank you for taking your time. I think we are both as the industry as well as the German political community very much engaged in this international discussion and want to see results. This summer was clearly too hot in Italy, it was too hot in Germany and probably in some places elsewhere. The issue is pressing, we have to work on that, and I think we all are very committed to achieve those targets without skipping SMEs out of capital markets altogether. Thank you. We are 7 minutes late. Take this as a biblical note. Goodbye.
Goodbye.